In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a shocking murder rocks the vicarage when Colonel Protheroe is found shot dead in the study. Was it his unhappy wife, Anne, desperate for freedom? The charming artist, Lawrence Redding, hiding a deadly secret? Or someone else in this quaint village where everyone has something to hide? Join Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster, as she unravels a web of love, betrayal and deception, piecing together clues: a stained glove, a mysterious screw, a vanished van, to expose a killer in just 30 seconds of gripping mystery. Chapter 1. A Troublesome Parishioner. The village of St. Mary Mead drowsed under the late summer sun, its cottages and lanes steeped in that peculiar English quiet that seems to hush even the birds. At the vicarage, a rambling house with ivy-clad walls, the Reverend Leonard Clement sat in his study, wrestling with a sermon that refused to take shape. The room, lined with books and warmed by a modest fire, was a haven of calm, yet Leonard's thoughts were anything but serene. His mind kept drifting to Colonel Lucius Protheroe, a man whose presence in the parish was as disruptive as a storm in a teacup. Colonel Protheroe, magistrate, churchwarden, and master of Old Hall, was a figure of authority in St. Mary Mead. But authority, Leonard reflected, did not always command affection. The colonel's brusque manner, his habit of barking orders as if still on a military parade ground, and his unyielding opinions on everything from hymn selection to village morals, had made him a lightning rod for resentment. Only yesterday, at a church council meeting, he had reduced Miss Weatherby, a timid spinster, to tears by dismissing her proposal for a new altar cloth as frivolous nonsense. Leonard, presiding, had felt a pang of sympathy for Miss Weatherby, and no small irritation with the colonel. The study door creaked open, and Griselda, Leonard's young wife, breezed in, her dark curls bouncing and her eyes alight with mischief. At 25, Griselda was a creature of contrasts, vivacious yet impractical, charming yet prone to domestic chaos. She carried a tray of tea things, which she set down with a clatter that made Leonard wince. "Really, Len, you look as glum as a wet Sunday," she said, pouring tea with a flourish that splashed the saucer. "Is it the sermon, or has Colonel Protheroe been at you again?" Leonard sighed, pushing his papers aside. "Both, I'm afraid. The colonel insists on meeting me tomorrow to go over the church accounts. He's convinced someone's been pilfering from the collection plate, though heaven knows who he suspects. Probably me." Griselda laughed, a bright, infectious sound. "Oh, that man! He's positively medieval. I swear, if someone put a bullet through him, the whole village would throw a party. Wouldn't they, Miss Marple?" Leonard started, realizing that Miss Jane Marple, their neighbour, was seated in the corner by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly. How had he not noticed her? Miss Marple, with her fluffy white hair and faded blue eyes, had a way of blending into the furniture, her presence as unassuming as the shawl draped over her shoulders. Yet Leonard knew her mild exterior hid a mind as sharp as a tack. She had lived in St. Mary Mead all her life, and her knowledge of its inhabitants, their habits, their secrets, was uncanny. Miss Marple looked up, her expression serene. "Dear Griselda, you do say the most shocking things," she said, her voice gentle but with a hint of amusement. "Colonel Protheroe is certainly unpopular, but one mustn't wish harm on anyone. Though I will say, his manner does provoke Strong feelings. Strong feelings. Griselda perched on the arm of Leonard's chair, sipping her tea. That's putting it mildly. Why, just this morning I heard Mrs. Price Ridley complaining that he'd snubbed her at the post office. And poor Anne Protheroe, his wife I mean, looks like a ghost these days. I saw her in the lane, and she barely managed a smile. No wonder, married to that wooger. Leonard frowned. Anne Protheroe, a striking woman in her 30s with a quiet elegance, was a subject of village sympathy. Her marriage to the Colonel, nearly 20 years her senior, was rumoured to be unhappy, though Anne's reserve kept gossip at bay. Their daughter, Lettice, a lanky girl of 17 with a penchant for dreamy silences, seemed equally oppressed by her father's iron rule. "Griselda, you mustn't exaggerate," Leonard said, though his tone lacked conviction. "The Colonel is difficult, but he's a pillar of the community, and Anne seems to manage." "Manage!" Griselda rolled her eyes. "That's what we all do with him, isn't it? Manage. Even you, Len, and you're a saint. If I were Anne, I'd have run. Off with that artist fellow. What's his name? Lawrence Redding. Now there's a man who looks like he could sweep a girl off her feet." Miss Marple's needles paused, and Leonard caught the faintest flicker in her eyes. Lawrence Redding, a newcomer to St. Mary Mead, had taken a studio in the village, his bohemian air and easy charm stirring interest among the younger set. There had been whispers of his friendship with Anne Protheroe, though Leonard dismissed them as idle talk. Still, he felt a twinge of unease. "Let's not indulge in scandal," he said firmly. "The Colonel may be trying, but he's not the devil incarnate. I'll meet him tomorrow at 6:15 and we'll sort out the accounts. Then perhaps we can all have some peace." Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her lips curving in a faint smile. "Peace is a rare commodity, Mr. Clement," she said softly. "People have a way of disturbing it, especially when they feel strongly. And in a village like ours, feelings have a way of bubbling up." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic click of Miss Marple's needles. Leonard glanced at her, wondering what lay behind her cryptic words. Griselda, oblivious, chattered on about the village fete, but Leonard's thoughts returned to Colonel Protheroe. He had no inkling, as he sipped his tea, that the Colonel's appointment at the Vicarage would set in motion a chain of events that would shake St. Mary Mead to its core. Chapter 2. The Fatal Appointment. The Vicarage clock ticked towards 6:15, its steady rhythm a counterpoint to the gathering unease in St. Mary Mead. The afternoon had turned blustery, with gusts rattling the windows of the Vicarage and sending leaves skittering across the lawn. Inside, the study remained a sanctuary of order, its oak desk polished to a gleam, its shelves heavy with theological tomes. Yet, as Leonard Clement prepared to leave, a sense of foreboding hung about him, like the storm clouds outside. Colonel Lucius Protheroe had arrived promptly, his heavy tread echoing in the hall as Mary, the Vicarage's sole housemaid, showed him in. Mary, a sturdy girl with a perpetually harried air, disliked the Colonel's brusque manner, but she bobbed a curtsy and left him in the study. Leonard, already late for a visit to old Mrs. Jessup, who lay ill at the edge of the village, paused, only to exchange a few words with his guest. "I shan't keep you long, Clement," Protheroe barked, settling into the chair behind the desk as if it were his own. His florid face, framed by iron-grey whiskers, bore the scowl of a man perpetually displeased. "These accounts are a disgrace. Irregularities, sir, irregularities. We'll have this sorted, or heads will roll." Leonard, buttoning his coat, murmured something placatory about reviewing the figures together. Protheroe's accusations of mismanagement stung, but there was no time to argue. "I'll be back by 7, he said, glancing at the clock. "Mary's in the kitchen if you need anything." Protheroe grunted, already rifling through a ledger he'd brought. As Leonard stepped into the hall, he heard the Colonel mutter, "Damned fools, the lot of them." The vicar shook his head, pulling the front door shut against the wind. He did not see the figure lingering near the garden gate, half hidden by the shadow of a yew tree, nor did he notice the tradesman's van parked just beyond the vicarage wall, its engine idling softly. In the kitchen, Mary busied herself with peeling potatoes, her movements brisk but distracted. The Colonel's presence in the house made her uneasy. His sharp tongue had once reduced her to tears over a smudged teacup. She glanced at the clock, 6:20 p.m., and wondered how long he'd stay. A sudden noise, like a chair scraping in the study, made her pause, but she dismissed it as the wind. Then, at precisely 6:30, a sharp crack split the air, unmistakable even through the thick walls. Mary froze, the peeler slipping from her hand. For a moment she stood rooted, heart pounding, before instinct propelled her toward the study. The hall was dim, the only light spilling from the study door left ajar. Pushing it open, she stifled a gasp. Colonel Protheroe lay slumped over. The desk, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, a dark stain spreading across the blotter. A pistol, small and glinting, lay on the floor near his hand, and the air held the acrid tang of gunpowder. Mary's scream brought Griselda running from the drawing-room where she'd been arranging flowers. "Mary, what? Oh, heavens!" Griselda's hand flew to her mouth as she saw the scene. Her first thought was for Leonard, but he was still out, and the sight of Protheroe's lifeless form rooted her to the spot. "Mary, fetch Dr. Haydock. At once," she managed, her voice trembling. "And don't touch anything." Mary bolted from the house, her clogs clattering on the path. Griselda, alone with the body, forced herself to look closer, though every instinct urged her to flee. The Colonel's eyes, wide and staring, seemed to accuse even in death. A scrap of paper protruded from his clenched fist, but Griselda dared not touch it. The wind howled outside, and she shivered, feeling the weight of the empty house. Dr. Haydock, a brisk, competent man with a reassuring manner, arrived within minutes, his black bag in hand. He examined Protheroe with practised efficiency, his face grim. "Shot through the temple, close range," he said, straightening. "Dead instantly, I'd wager. This is a matter for the police, Mrs. Clement." Griselda nodded, her mind racing. Leonard's not here. He went to see Mrs. Jessup. Oh, what will he say when he returns? Dr. Haydock laid a hand on her arm. "Stay calm, Griselda. I'll telephone Inspector Slack in Much Benham. He'll want to see everything as it is." He glanced at the pistol, then at the open window, its curtains fluttering. "Odd," he murmured. No sign of a struggle. As Dr. Haydock made the call, Mary hovered in the doorway, twisting her apron. "I didn't hear no one, ma'am," she whispered to Griselda. "Just that shot, and him muttering before. But there was a van outside by the gate, just afore." it happened. I saw it when I took out the rubbish." Griselda frowned, the detail snagging her attention. "A van? Whose was it?" Mary shook her head. "Couldn't say, ma'am. It was gone quick-like after the shot." Across the lane, in her neat cottage, Miss Jane Marple stood at her garden gate, her sharp eyes missing little. She had seen the van too, its faded lettering indistinct in the dusk, and noted the hurried departure of a figure in a cap, slipping into the driver's seat just as Mary's scream pierced the evening. Miss Marple's lips pursed, and she turned back to her roses, her mind already sifting through the day's observations. A murder at the vicarage, she thought, was no small matter, and St. Mary Mead's secrets were about to be laid bare. Chapter 3. Suspicions and Alibis. The morning after Colonel Protheroe's murder dawned grey and oppressive, as if St. Mary Mead itself mourned under a pall of suspicion. The vicarage, usually a hub of quiet routine, buzzed with the comings and goings of Inspector Slack's men, their boots tracking mud across Mary's freshly scrubbed floors. Inspector Slack, a wiry man with a face like a ferret and a manner to match, had taken over the drawing-room, turning it into a makeshift command post. Papers littered the table, and a constable stood guard at the study door, where the colonel's body had been removed under Dr. Haydock's supervision the previous night. The village, meanwhile, thrummed with whispers, each cottager and shopkeeper adding their own thread to the tapestry of gossip. Leonard Clement returned from his ill-fated visit to Mrs. Jessup to find his home invaded and his wife pale with shock. Griselda, fortified by strong tea, recounted the grim discovery, her usual vivacity subdued. "It was awful, Len," she said, twisting a handkerchief. "Mary found him, and I couldn't think what to do. Dr. Haydock says it was a pistol shot, right through the head. Who could have done such a thing?" Leonard, his face drawn, sank into a chair. "In my study of all places," he murmured. "Protheroe was no saint, but it's unthinkable." His mind churned with questions, not least why the colonel had been alone in the vicarage at all. The crumpled note arranging their meeting, now in Inspector Slack's possession, gnawed at him. Had he unwittingly set the stage for murder? Inspector Slack, impatient for answers, summoned Leonard for questioning. The inspector's sharp eyes missed nothing, and his tone carried an edge of accusation. "You say you were called away, Mr. Clement, to this Mrs. Jessup. Convenient, wasn't it? Left the colonel alone, with no one to see what happened next." Leonard bristled, though he kept his voice steady. "Mrs. Jessup is elderly and frail. Her neighbour sent for me at 5:30, and I couldn't refuse. I was gone by 6, and Protheroe was alive when I left. Mary can confirm it." Slack's lips curled, not quite a smile. "Oh, we'll talk to the maid. But let's be clear, Vicar. Protheroe wasn't short of enemies, and this meeting of yours smells like a set-up. That note, why was it in the wastebasket, eh? Trying to cover something up." "It was a draft," Leonard said, his patience fraying. "I rewrote it and gave the proper one to Protheroe. Surely you don't think I think everyone's a suspect until proven otherwise," Slack cut in. "You, your wife, the maid, the whole blessed village. Now tell me about Protheroe. Who wanted him dead?" Leonard hesitated, aware that his words could ignite a firestorm of suspicion. He was unpopular, he admitted. His manner was abrupt, and he had strong views. Some found him overbearing. but I know of no one who'd resort to murder." Slack's pen scratched across his notebook. "Unpopular, you say? That's a start. I'll need names, Vicar, and don't leave anyone out." As Leonard was dismissed, he felt the weight of the inspector's scrutiny like a physical burden. Outside, the village pulsed with activity. News of the murder had spread like wildfire, and knots of villagers gathered at the post office and the Blue Boar, their voices hushed but eager. At the vicarage gate, Miss Jane Marple paused, her basket of garden clippings in hand, her keen eyes scanning the scene. She had heard Mary's account of the van, and the detail lingered in her mind, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. She made her way to the vicarage, where Griselda greeted her with a wan smile. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's too dreadful," Griselda said, ushering her into the parlour. "Leonard's been questioned, and Inspector Slack is like a terrier with a bone. He thinks we're all hiding something. And poor Mary's in a state. She keeps saying she should have stayed in the study." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting needles appearing as if by magic. "Mary mustn't blame herself," she said, her voice soothing. "She could hardly have foreseen such a tragedy. But tell me, Griselda, what do you know of the Colonel's last hours? Every detail matters, however small." Griselda, grateful for Miss Marple's calm presence, recounted the evening. Leonard's departure, Protheroe's arrival, Mary's chores, and the gunshot that shattered the quiet. Mary says she heard him muttering about fools before she went to the kitchen. And there was that van. She saw it by the gate, but it was gone after the shot. Do you think it means something?" Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. "A van is an interesting detail," she said. "In a village, one notices such things. Tradesmen come and go, but their movements are predictable. An unfamiliar van at such a time, it bears thinking about." She paused, her eyes distant. And the Colonel's enemies, Griselda, who might have wished him harm. Griselda leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Well, everyone really. He was beastly to Anne, his wife. You've seen how she shrinks when he's near. And Lettice, their daughter, positively loathes him. She told me once he threatened to cut her off if she didn't behave. Then there's Lawrence Redding, the artist. He and Protheroe had a row last week at the Blue Boar. Something about land Protheroe owns near Lawrence's studio. And Mrs. Price Ridley swears Protheroe cheated her over a charity fund, though I think she's just spiteful." Miss Marple listened, her expression bland, but her mind alert. "A wide net of motives," she murmured, "and yet murder requires more than dislike. It requires opportunity and nerve." She glanced out the window, where a constable was, examining the garden path. "I wonder what Inspector Slack makes of it all." Inspector Slack, at that moment, was interrogating Anne Protheroe at Old Hall. The widow sat in the drawing-room, her pale beauty accentuated by a black dress that seemed to drain her of colour. Her hands twisted in her lap, but her voice was steady as she answered Slack's barrage of questions. "I was walking in the woods," she said, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the inspector. "I often do in the evenings. It clears my mind. I left the house at 6 and returned after 7 when I heard the news." Slack's eyes narrowed. "Alone, were you? No one saw you, I suppose?" N's lips tightened. "The woods are quiet at that hour. I met no one." "And your husband? You two got along, did you?" A flicker of emotion crossed Anne's face, too brief to name. "Lucius was a difficult man," she said carefully. We had our differences, but I wished him no harm." Slack jotted a note, unconvinced. "Differences, eh? Enough to drive you to the woods while he's shot in the vicar's study. Will, check your story, Mrs. Protheroe. Don't leave the village." As Anne was dismissed, Slack turned his attention to Lawrence Redding, summoned from his studio in a converted barn. Lawrence, with his dark good looks and easy charm, carried an air of defiance as he faced the inspector. "Yes, I argued with Protheroe," he admitted, lounging in a chair. "He wanted to sell the land my studio's on, and I told him he was a greedy old sod. But I didn't kill him." "Where were you at 6:30 yesterday?" Slack demanded. "Painting," Lawrence said promptly. "In my studio. I've a canvas half done to prove it. Go look if you like." Slack's pen paused. "A canvas. Convenient. Anyone see you? There?" Lawrence shrugged. "It's a quiet spot. I work alone. But I wasn't near the vicarage, if that's what you're driving at. And yes, I own a pistol. Kept it from the war. It's in my studio, locked away. You're welcome to check that too." The inspector made a note to do just that. Lawrence's nonchalance grated, but an alibi, however flimsy, was an alibi. Slack moved on to Lettice Protheroe, who drifted into the room like a sleepwalker, her fair hair tangled and her eyes vague. At 17, Lettice seemed to exist in a world of her own, and Slack's sharp questions only deepened her distraction. "I was at Esther's," she said, naming a friend in the village. "We were talking, I think. I left after 7 and came home." Slack pounced. "You think? Your friend's not so sure. She says you left earlier, maybe 6. Where were you, Miss Protheroe?" Lettice blinked, as if surprised by the question. "I don't know. Walking, perhaps. I don't like clocks." Exasperated, Slack dismissed her, muttering about flibbertigibbets. Yet Lettice's vagueness, like Lawrence's confidence and Anne's composure, struck him as oddly rehearsed. He dispatched constables to verify their stories, but the village's web of paths and woods made alibis hard to pin down. By afternoon, St. Mary Mead was a cauldron of speculation. At the post office, Mrs. Price Ridley held court, her voice carrying to the queue. "I saw Anne Protheroe with that Redding fellow, mark my words," she declared. "Last week, near the woods, as cosy as you please. And now her husband's dead. It's scandalous, that's what it is." Miss Weatherby, clutching her stamps, nodded eagerly. "And Lettice, poor child, she's been so strange lately. I heard her tell Miss Hartnell she wished her father would go away. Such a bad thing to say." The gossip reached Miss Marple's cottage, where she sat with Griselda and Dr. Haydock, who had stopped by to check on the vicarage household. Over tea, Griselda relayed the village's theories, her eyes wide. "They're saying Anne and Lawrence are lovers, and Lettice knew something about it. And then there's the pistol. Everyone knows Lawrence has one." "Oh, Miss Marple, it's like a dreadful novel." Dr. Haydock, stirring his tea, frowned. "Gossip's a dangerous thing," he said. "Slack's got his hands full, but he's no fool. He'll follow the evidence, not rumours. Though I must say, the pistol on the floor bothers me. Too neat, somehow." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright with interest. "Too neat," she echoed. "Yes, that's precisely it. Alibis, too, can be too perfect, or too imperfect. Mrs. Protheroe's walk, Mr. Redding's painting, Miss Lettice's vagueness. They fit together like a play, don't they? But plays have directors, and I wonder who's pulling the strings." Griselda stared, intrigued. "You think they're lying? All of them?" "Not lying, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "But concealing. People do, you know, when they're frightened, or protecting someone. In a village one sees it often. Like my nephew's gardener, who swore he was pruning roses when he'd been sneaking apples. The truth was in his eyes, not his words." Dr. Haydock chuckled. "You're wasted in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple. Slack could use you on his team." Miss Marple smiled, resuming her knitting. "Oh, I'm no detective, Doctor. I only watch people. And people, you see, are very like my roses. Beautiful, but full of thorns if you're not careful." As the day waned, Inspector Slack stood in the vicarage study, staring at the desk where Protheroe had died. The pistol, bagged as evidence, matched the caliber of Lawrence's, but its presence nagged at him. Why leave it behind? A suicide staged. As murder? A killer's mistake? He turned to the window, noting the latch was loose, easily opened from outside. The garden path beyond showed no footprints, thanks to the dry weather. But Slack's instincts told him the answer lay close. Perhaps too close. In her garden, Miss Marple clipped a fading bloom, her thoughts circling the van, the pistol, and the alibis that seemed to dance just out of reach. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Archer, the charwoman, who'd mentioned seeing Lawrence Redding near the vicarage 2 days before, carrying a parcel. And then there was Anne Protheroe's scarf, found by a child in the woods, not far from the path she claimed to have walked. Small things, but to Miss Marple they were like stitches in a pattern, waiting to be sewn together. The village settled into an uneasy dusk, its secrets simmering beneath the surface. Inspector Slack, armed with suspicion but little proof, prepared for a long investigation. Leonard, tormented by the violation of his home, prayed for guidance. Griselda, restless, vowed to help in her own haphazard way. And Miss Marple, her mind as sharp as her pruning shears, knew that the truth, like her roses, would bloom in time, if only one knew where to look. Chapter 4. The Vicar's Dilemma. The vicarage, once a haven of pastoral calm, had become a stage for suspicion in the days following Colonel Protheroe's murder. By the third morning, the air was thick with unease, as if the very walls absorbed the whispers of St. Mary Mead's gossips. Leonard Clement, whose days were usually spent tending to souls, found himself ensnared in a temporal ordeal. The study, where Protheroe had met his end, remained sealed by Inspector Slack's orders, forcing Leonard to work in the cramped parlour, his sermons interrupted by the tramp of constables' boots. The weight of the murder pressed on him, not merely as a violation of his home, but as a personal reproach. Had he, by arranging that fateful meeting, unwittingly invited death to his door? Leonard's troubles deepened with each encounter with Inspector Slack, whose relentless questioning seemed to cast a net over the entire household. That morning, as Leonard attempted to focus on a passage from Corinthians, Slack summoned him to the drawing room, now a cluttered hub of police activity. The inspector stood by the fireplace, his sharp eyes glinting like a hawk's, a notebook open in his hand. "Sit down, Mr. Clement," Slack said, his tone clipped. We need to go over this note business again. Found in the wastebasket crumpled with your handwriting. Care to explain why you'd toss it out if it was just a draft? Leonard, weary of the accusation, adjusted his spectacles. As I've said, Inspector, I wrote a quick note to confirm our meeting, then rewrote it more neatly. The first was discarded. It's hardly sinister. Slack's lips twitched, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Hardly sinister, eh? Yet here we are, with a dead man in your study, and a note that suggests you wanted him there alone. You left the vicarage at 6, you say, for this Mrs. Jessup, but her neighbour claims you didn't arrive till nearly 7. Where were you, Vicar? Leonard's stomach tightened. The walk to Mrs. Jessup's cottage, across the village's winding lanes, had taken longer than expected, delayed by a chance meeting with Mr. Hawes, the curate, who'd been fretting about a parish matter. I stopped to speak with Mr. Hawes, Leonard said, striving for calm. It was brief, but the lanes are narrow, and I'm not a fast walker. Mrs. Jessup can confirm when I arrived. Slack jotted a note, his pen scratching like an insect. We'll check with Hawes. But it's a gap, Mr. Clement, and gaps make me twitchy. You didn't like Protheroe, did you? He was hounding you about church funds, making trouble. Maybe you saw a chance to be rid of him. That's absurd, Leonard snapped, his patience fraying. I'm a clergyman, not a murderer. Protheroe was difficult, yes, but I had no reason to harm him. Slack leaned forward, his voice low. Everyone's got reasons, Vicar. You'd be surprised what folks hide behind a dog collar. Now, tell me about this phone call Mary mentioned. Before Protheroe arrived, she says the telephone rang. You took it. What was that about? Leonard frowned, the memory vague. It was nothing. A wrong number, I think. A woman's voice, asking for someone I didn't know. I told her she'd misdialed and hung up. It was just before I left. Again, eyes narrowed. A woman, eh? Interesting. Mary says it sounded urgent, but you brushed it off. Maybe it wasn't a wrong number. Maybe it was someone making sure you'd be out of the way. The suggestion struck Leonard like a cold wind. He opened his mouth to protest, but Slack waved him off. That's all for now. Don't leave the village, Mr. Clement. We're watching. Dismissed, Leonard retreated to the parlour, his mind a tumult. The idea that the phone call was part of a plot unnerved him, casting the ordinary rhythms of his day in a sinister light. He tried to recall the voice, soft, hurried, perhaps familiar, but it eluded him, like a dream fading at dawn. As he sank into a chair, Griselda burst in, her cheeks flushed from a morning in the village. Len, it's a circus out there, she said, tossing her hat onto a table. Mrs. Price Ridley's telling everyone you're hiding something. And Miss Hartnell swears she saw a stranger near the vicarage that night. Oh, and Miss Marple's here. She insisted on coming, says she wants to help. Leonard managed a weak smile as Miss Jane Marple entered, her step light despite the basket of wool and gardening gloves she carried. Her faded blue eyes, framed by a lace cap, held a quiet intensity, and Leonard felt a flicker of relief. Miss Marple, with her unassuming air, had a way of cutting through chaos like a knife through butter. Mr. Clement, you look quite worn, Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. This business is a trial for you, I'm sure, but we mustn't let it overwhelm us. Griselda's told me of Inspector Slack's questions, and I thought I might offer a little perspective. Griselda perched on the arm of Leonard's chair, eager. Perspective's just what we need, Miss Marple. Slack's got Len in his sights, and it's not fair. Tell her about the note, Len, and that wretched phone call." Leonard recounted his interview, the crumpled note, and Slack's insinuations about the phone call. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking softly, her face a mask of placid attention. When he finished, she tilted her head, as if studying a particularly intricate stitch. "The note is curious," she said, "but not, I think, the heart of the matter. A draft discarded is no great mystery. People are careless with paper. The phone call, however, is another thing entirely. A woman's voice, you say, Mr. Clement, and urgent. Did it strike you as someone you know?" Leonard shook his head. "I can't say. It was so brief, and I was distracted, thinking of Mrs. Jessup. But Slack's idea, that it was meant to get me out of the house, it's unsettling." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Unsettling, yes. In a village, telephone calls are rarely random. We know each other's voices, our habits. If someone called to ensure your absence, they knew your routine, and Protheroe's. That suggests planning, doesn't it?" Griselda's eyes widened. "Planning? You mean someone lured Protheroe here and made sure Len was gone? That's diabolical." "Not diabolical, my dear," Miss Marple said gently. "Merely human. People act from need or fear or love twisted into something darker. I've seen it before, in small ways, like Mrs. Green's nephew, who broke her best vase and blamed the cat. The lie was simple, but the motive, fear of punishment, was clear." Leonard rubbed his temples. "But who would plan such a thing? Protheroe had enemies, but to kill him in my study, with my note as bait, it feels personal." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where a constable was measuring the garden path. "Personal, indeed," she murmured, "or perhaps convenient. The vicarage is a public place, yet private too. Anyone might come and go, unnoticed, especially in the evening. I wonder." She trailed off, her eyes narrowing as they caught a faint mark on the study window-sill, visible through the glass. It was a smudge, greenish, like paint, overlooked by Slack's men in their focus on the desk and pistol. Rising, Miss Marple approached the window, her movements deliberate. "Griselda, dear, would you fetch Mary? I'd like to ask her something." Griselda hurried off, and Leonard watched Miss Marple, intrigued despite his fatigue. "What is it, Miss Marple? That smudge?" "A small thing," she said, "but small things matter. Paint, I think, and fresh. It wasn't there before the murder, or Mary would have cleaned it. She's particular about her windows." Mary appeared, her apron twisted in her hands, her face pale. "Yes, miss," she said, glancing nervously at Leonard. "Mary," Miss Marple said kindly, "you're a careful girl, and you notice things. This smudge on the sill, did you see it before Tuesday evening?" Mary shook her head. "No, miss. I washed the windows Monday, and they were spotless. I'd have seen it, sure as anything." "And the garden," Miss Marple continued. "You mentioned a van by the gate. Did you notice anyone near it? A man, perhaps, or a woman?" Mary hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I didn't see clear, miss. It was getting dark, and I was busy. But there was someone, a shadow, like moving quick. I thought it was the driver, but I didn't look long." Sir Marple nodded, dismissing Mary with a smile. "Thank you, Mary. You've been most helpful. As Mary retreated, Griselda returned, her curiosity aflame. "Paint and a shadow! Miss Marple, you're on to something, aren't you? Is it the killer?" "Not yet, my dear," Miss Marple said, resuming her seat, "but pieces are falling into place. Paint on a sill, a van that vanishes, a phone call that distracts. These are threads, and threads make a pattern. We must be patient." Leonard, though heartened by Miss Marple's clarity, felt the weight of his dilemma anew. The vicarage was no longer his own, its sanctity marred by blood and suspicion. Slack's questions about the note and his whereabouts gnawed at him, and the phone call, now cast in a sinister light, deepened his unease. He was a man of faith, yet faith offered little shield against the inspector's relentless logic. The village, meanwhile, churned with its own theories. At the Blue Boar, Mr. Archer, the publican, recounted Protheroe's last visit, when he'd argued with Lawrence Redding over a pint. Redding called him a tyrant, Archer told his patrons, and Protheroe near threw a glass at him. "If you ask me, that artist's got a temper." Mrs. Lestrange, a mysterious newcomer who kept to herself, was seen walking near the vicarage that evening, prompting Miss Hartnell to speculate about dark secrets. Even the curate, Mr. Hawes, drew whispers, his nervous demeanour and recent illness fueling rumours of a guilty conscience. The gossip reached Miss Marple's cottage, where she sifted through it like a gardener sorting seeds, discarding the chaff, but keeping what might grow. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the church, where Leonard was arranging hymnals, seeking solace in routine. The stone walls, cool and ancient, offered a brief respite, and Miss Marple's presence was a balm. "Mr. Clement," she said, "you mustn't let this burden you too deeply. The truth will out, as it always does, but it needs a little help, like a plant needs water." Leonard managed a smile. "You're kind, Miss Marple, but I feel caught, like a fly in a web. Slack suspects me, or at least my negligence. And the village, they look at me differently now." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Villages are like that, Mr. Clement. They watch, they judge, but they also reveal, if you know how to listen. Take Mary's shadow, or that paint. Small clues, but they point to someone who moved with purpose. Someone who knew the vicarage, and Protheroe's habits." Leonard nodded, though doubt lingered. "And the phone call? If it was deliberate, who made it, and why?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "That, I think, is the key. A woman's voice, urgent, timed to draw you away. It suggests intimacy, with you or with Protheroe. In my experience, such calls are never accidental. Like my friend's cook, who swore she'd rung the butcher by mistake. But it was her sweetheart on the line. The mistake was the story, not the call." As they spoke, a constable appeared, summoning Leonard back to Slack. Miss Marple watched. Him go! Her mind turning over the smudge, the van, and the voice that had set the tragedy in motion. She stepped into the churchyard, where the wind stirred the yews, and paused by the vicarage gate. The spot where the van had idled was bare now, but she knelt, her sharp eyes catching a glint in the grass. A tiny metal clip, like those used in a pen. She tucked it into her basket, her lips pursing. Back at the vicarage, Slack was grilling Mary about the phone call, his patience thin. "You're sure it was a woman, girl? No name, no hint?" Mary, near tears, shook her head. "I didn't listen close, sir. I was peeling spuds, and the vicar took it quick. It was just a voice, soft-like, but in a hurry." Slack dismissed her, his mind racing. The call, the note, the open window, all pointed to a plan, but the players eluded him. He glanced at Leonard, who stood by, pale but composed. "We'll find who made that call, Vicar," Slack said, "and when we do, I'll wager it leads us straight to the killer." Leonard said nothing, but the weight of the inspector's words settled on him like dust. The vicarage, his sanctuary, was now a maze of clues and shadows, and he, its unwilling keeper, stood at its heart. Miss Marple, returning to her cottage, began to knit again, her thoughts weaving a pattern only she could see. The truth, she knew, was close, hidden in the ordinary, waiting for a keen eye to uncover it. Chapter 5. Village Secrets. The 4th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder draped St. Mary Mead in a restless haze, the village caught between the shock of violence and the thrill of speculation. The vicarage, its windows glinting dully under a leaden sky, stood as a silent witness to the tragedy, its once welcoming doors now shadowed by suspicion. Inspector Slack's investigation pressed forward with the tenacity of a bloodhound, his men combing the village for clues while he interrogated its inhabitants. Yet, the more he probed, the more St. Mary Mead's secrets unravelled, each revelation a thread in a tapestry of deceit that seemed to ensnare everyone. Leonard Clement, still reeling from Inspector Slack's relentless scrutiny, found solace in the mundane tasks of his calling. He visited parishioners, offered prayers, and tried to ignore the sidelong glances that followed him through the lanes. The crumpled note, the mysterious phone call, and the paint smudge Miss Marple had noticed gnawed at him, but he lacked the clarity to connect them. Griselda, ever resilient, threw herself into distracting the village with plans for a charity tea, though her chatter betrayed a nervous edge. "We must keep spirits up, Len," she insisted, arranging scones in the parlour. "If we let this murder consume us, we'll all go mad." Miss Jane Marple, meanwhile, moved through St. Mary Mead like a quiet spectre, her basket of knitting and garden clippings a familiar sight. Her cottage, with its neat flower beds and lace-curtained windows, was a hub of observation, where she sifted the village's gossip with the precision of a jeweller inspecting gems. She had tucked the metal clip from the vicarage gate into a tin box alongside her mental catalogue of oddities. The greenish paint, the vanished van, and the woman's voice on the phone. Each was a fragment, and Miss Marple knew that fragments, properly arranged, could reveal a picture. That morning, the village hummed with fresh rumours, fuelled by Inspector Slack's latest round of interviews. At the post office, Mrs. Price Ridley, her hat adorned with an ostentatious feather, held forth to a rapt audience. "I saw them, I tell you," she declared, her voice carrying to the street. "Anne Protheroe and that Redding fellow, lingering by the stile near the woods, not 10 days ago. Their heads were close together, and she laughed with her husband barely cold. It's a disgrace, and I told Inspector Slack as much." Miss Weatherby, clutching a parcel, nodded vigorously. "And poor Lettice, so distracted. I saw her yesterday, wandering by the church, muttering to herself. She looked positively haunted. Do you think she knew something about her father's plans?" The gossip swirled, each villager adding a flourish. Mr. Hawes, the curate, had been seen. pacing the churchyard at dusk, his sallow face drawn, prompting Miss Hartnell to whisper of guilty secrets. Mrs. Lestrange, the enigmatic widow who had taken a cottage on the village's edge, drew suspicion for her aloofness, with some claiming she'd been near the vicarage the night of the murder. Even old Mrs. Archer, the charwoman, contributed, muttering to her cronies about Protheroe's shady dealings with a London financier, though her evidence was as vague as her memory. Miss Marple, attending a parish meeting in the church hall, observed the villagers' interactions with her usual acuity. The meeting, ostensibly to plan the charity tea, was a stage for veiled accusations and nervous glances. Anne Protheroe, present despite her mourning, sat apart, her dark eyes fixed on a hymn book. When Lawrence Redding's name arose in discussion, his offer to paint a mural for the church was debated. Anne's fingers tightened on the book, a fleeting betrayal of composure. Lettice, slouched beside her stepmother, doodled on a scrap of paper, her expression vacant, but her pencil moving with purpose. Mrs. Price Ridley, seizing the moment, addressed the room. "I trust we're not endorsing that artist's work without due consideration," she said, her tone pointed. "Given recent events, one wonders about his character." A murmur rippled through the hall, and Anne's head lifted, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Redding's talent is not in question," she said, her voice low but firm. "His offer is generous, and we should judge it on its merits." The room stilled, sensing the undercurrent. Miss Marple, seated near the back, noted Anne's defence and Lettice's sudden attention, her pencil pausing. The moment passed, but it lingered in Miss Marple's mind, a clue to the ties binding the Protheroe household to the dashing artist. After the meeting, Miss Marple lingered, exchanging pleasantries with Miss Hartnell, who was eager to share her theories. "I don't trust that Mrs. Lestrange," Miss Hartnell confided, adjusting her spectacles. "She keeps to herself, but I saw her walking near the vicarage that evening, just before 6. What was she doing there, I ask you?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression bland. "Mrs. Lestrange is new to us," she said. "Newcomers often seem mysterious until we know them. But it's an interesting observation, Miss Hartnell. One never knows what a walk might signify." As she left the hall, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the web of relationships in St. Mary Mead. Anne's defence of Lawrence, Lettice's distraction, Mrs. Lestrange's solitary walks. Each suggested hidden currents, like ripples beneath a calm pond. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Archer, who had cleaned for Protheroe years ago, and hinted at his ruthless business tactics. "He'd ruin a man and sleep sound after," Mrs. Archer had said, her rheumy eyes bitter. Could such dealings have followed Protheroe to St. Mary Mead, culminating in his death? At the vicarage, Inspector Slack was pursuing a different lead. He had summoned Mr. Hawes, the curate, whose nervous demeanour and frequent illnesses had caught his attention. Hawes, a slight man with a perpetual cough, sat in the drawing-room, his hands clasped tightly. "You were at the vicarage that afternoon, Mr. Hawes," Slack said, his voice like a whip. "The vicar says you stopped him on his way to Mrs. Jessop's. What was so urgent?" Hawes swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It was a parish matter," he said faintly. "The hymnals needed reordering, and I wanted his advice." "It was nothing important," Slack's eyes narrowed. "Nothing important, yet you waylay the vicar just before Protheroe's killed." And I hear you overheard Protheroe threatening to disinherit his daughter. Care to explain?" Hawes paled, his hands trembling. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop. It was at Old Hall a week ago. I was delivering a notice, and I heard them arguing in the library. Protheroe was angry, said Lettuce was ungrateful, and he'd cut her off. I left quickly. It wasn't my place to listen." Slack leaned forward, sensing weakness. "But you told someone, didn't you? Who was it, Hawes? Lettuce, Redding. Or maybe you had your own grudge against Protheroe." "No!" Hawes's voice cracked. "I told no one. I swear it. I've been unwell, Inspector. My nerves aren't strong. Please, I had nothing to do with it." Slack dismissed him, unconvinced but lacking evidence to press further. Hawes's story, like so many in St. Mary Mead, was plausible yet porous, a sieve that held little under scrutiny. The inspector turned his attention to the pistol, now confirmed as a match for Lawrence Redding's, though its clean surface yielded no fingerprints. The open window, the lack of struggle, and the precise timing of the shot pointed to a killer who knew the vicarage's rhythms. A local, Slack was certain, but one clever enough to leave only whispers of their presence. Miss Marple, returning to her cottage, invited Griselda and Dr. Haydock for tea, sensing the need to pool their observations. Over delicate china cups, Griselda recounted the parish meeting, her voice animated. Anne stood up for Lawrence, and you should have seen Mrs. Price Ridley's face, like she'd swallowed a lemon. And Lettuce, she was drawing something, not listening. But when Anne spoke, she looked up sharp. "Do you think they're hiding something, Miss Marple?" Dr. Haydock, stirring his tea, frowned. "Hiding's the word for it. Slack's got a list of suspects as long as my arm. But no one's story breaks. Anne's walk, Lawrence's painting, Lettuce's visit to her friend, they're all just solid enough to hold, but not airtight. It's like chasing smoke." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes thoughtful. "Smoke, yes, but smoke comes from fire, Doctor. These alibis, so carefully placed, suggest a design. I've been thinking about Mrs. Lestrange. Miss Hartnell saw her near the vicarage, and while it may mean nothing, it's odd for a newcomer to wander so close at such a time. And then there's Mr. Hawes, so anxious, and Mrs. Archer's tales of Protheroe's past. Each is a piece, but the puzzle wants a centre." Griselda leaned forward, her eyes bright. "The centre's the vicarage, isn't it? That's where it happened. Maybe someone was watching, waiting for Protheroe to be alone." Miss Marple nodded, her mind circling the paint smudge and the metal clip. "Watching, indeed. The vicarage is open to all, parishioners, tradesmen, even passers-by. But to kill there in daylight requires boldness or desperation. I wonder about that Van Mary saw. It's too specific to dismiss, yet no one claims it. In my experience, such details are like my neighbour's dog, barking at shadows, the shadows. Real if you find it." Dr. Haydock chuckled. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. Slack's got his men scouring the woods, but you're piecing it together with tea and knitting. What's next? A trap for the killer?" Miss Marple's lips curved. A faint smile. "Not a trap, Doctor. Just a little light to see what's hidden. People reveal themselves, you know, when they think no one's looking. Like my maid's cousin, who stole a silver spoon and swore she'd only borrowed it." Her blush gave her away. As the tea ended, Miss Marple walked to the vicarage, her basket swinging. The garden gate, where the van had idled, drew her eye. and she paused, scanning the ground. A faint tire mark, overlooked by Slack's men, caught her attention, its tread distinct. She made a mental note, adding it to her collection of fragments. Inside, she found Leonard, his face etched with worry, sorting parish records in the parlour. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "you're a sight for sore eyes. This house feels like a prison, with Slack's men everywhere. I keep thinking about that phone call. If it was meant to draw me away, I played right into their hands." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming. "You mustn't blame yourself, Mr. Clement. The guilty are those who act, not those who are acted upon. The phone call is troubling, yes, but it's a clue, like the paint or the clip I found. Small things, but they point to someone who moved, with purpose." Leonard's brow furrowed. "A clip? What sort?" "A metal one, like those in a fountain pen," Miss Marple said. "By the gate, where the van was. It may mean nothing, but I keep it in mind. In a village, you see, everything connects, like the stitches in my scarf. Pull one thread, and the whole unravels." Leonard managed a faint smile, heartened by her calm. "You make it sound simple, Miss Marple, but Slack's no closer to an answer, and the village is tearing itself apart. I heard Mrs. Price Ridley accusing Anne outright, and Mr. Hawes looks like he'll collapse under the strain." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Hawes, yes. His nerves are telling, aren't they? And Mrs. Price Ridley's accusations, while spiteful, carry a grain of truth. Anne and Lawrence are linked, if only by rumour. But rumour, Mr. Clement, is like a mirror. It distorts, but it reflects something real." As evening fell, Inspector Slack stood in the vicarage study, staring at the desk where Protheroe had died. The paint smudge, now noted by his men, baffled him. Too small for a struggle, too distinct for chance. He traced the window's edge, picturing the killer's entry. Silent, swift, precise. The phone call, he decided, was the key. If he could trace it, he'd have his man or woman. He dispatched a constable to the exchange, hoping for a record, though rural lines were notoriously vague. In her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp, her knitting a soft rhythm against the quiet. She thought of Anne's tightened fingers, lettuces, pencil, Hawes's trembling hands, and the clip by the gate. The village's secrets were like her garden weeds, persistent, hidden, but rooted in plain sight. She closed her eyes, letting the pattern form, knowing that soon a single thread would pull the truth free. Chapter 6. The Missing Pistol. The 5th day of the investigation into Colonel Protheroe's murder dawned with a brittle clarity, the kind of autumn morning where every leaf seemed etched against the sky. St. Mary Mead, however, was far from serene. The village pulsed with a nervous energy, its lanes alive with whispered theories and darting glances. The vicarage, still under Inspector Slack's iron grip, felt less like a home and more like a battlefield, its rooms dissected by constables searching for answers. Leonard Clement, caught in the crosshairs of suspicion, moved through his duties with a heaviness that belied his clerical calm. The paint smudge, the metal clip, and the elusive phone call haunted him, each a reminder of the violence that had invaded his sanctuary. Inspector Slack, relentless as ever, had shifted his focus to physical evidence, convinced that the key to the murder lay in its mechanics. The pistol found on the study floor a sleek .32 caliber, was the linchpin of his case, and its connection to Lawrence Redding had electrified the investigation. That morning, Slack stood in the Vicarage drawing-room, his sharp features taut with purpose, as a constable delivered a report from the hedgerow near the Vicarage. The pistol, wrapped in a cloth, had been discovered late the previous evening by a farmer's boy, hidden beneath a tangle of brambles. Its surface, wiped clean of fingerprints, bore no trace of its user, but its caliber matched the fatal bullet, and its provenance pointed squarely at Redding. Slack summoned Lawrence to the Vicarage, his tone brooking no delay. The artist arrived, his dark eyes wary, but his manner defiant, a contrast to the nervous villagers who shrank under Slack's gaze. He lounged in a chair, one leg crossed over the other, as if the interrogation were a minor inconvenience. "This your pistol, Redding?" Slack demanded, holding up the bagged weapon. "Don't waste my time. We know you own one, and this matches the description you gave." Lawrence's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "It looks like mine, yes. I told you, I kept it, in my studio, locked in a drawer. But I haven't seen it in days. Someone took it. I noticed it missing Monday, before the murder." Slack's eyes glinted, sensing a crack. "Missing, eh? Convenient, that. You expect me to believe someone pinched your gun, used it to kill Protheroe, and then tossed it in a hedgerow? Why not report it stolen?" Lawrence shrugged, a gesture that infuriated Slack. "I didn't think much of it at first. Things get misplaced in a studio. Brushes, paints, tools. I figured it'd turn up. By the time I realized it was gone for good, Protheroe was dead, and I knew how it'd look if I said anything." Slack leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "It looks like you shot him, Redding. You had motive. Everyone heard your row with Protheroe over that land. You had means, this pistol. And your alibi, painting alone in your studio, is as thin as tissue. No one saw you. No one heard you. Care to change your story?" Lawrence met Slack's gaze, unflinching. "I didn't kill him. I was painting, like I said. There's a canvas to prove it. Half-finished, dated. And if I'd shot Protheroe, why leave my own gun behind? I'm not that stupid." Slack's lips curled, but he had no immediate riposte. The canvas, inspected by a constable, bore fresh, paint consistent with Lawrence's claim, though it proved little about the exact time. With a curt nod, Slack arrested Lawrence on suspicion, ordering him held at Much Benham Station. The village, learning of the arrest, erupted in fresh gossip, with Mrs. Price Ridley declaring it only a matter of time, and Miss Hartnell lamenting the corruption of youth. At the vicarage, the news struck like a thunderclap. Griselda, arranging flowers to restore some normalcy, dropped a vase when Leonard relayed Slack's decision. "Arrested!" she cried, her hands trembling. "But Lawrence can't have done it, Len. He's too charming. And that pistol, just lying there, it's too obvious, isn't it?" Leonard, his face etched with worry, nodded. "It's too neat, as Miss Marple might say. Slack's jumping at the first solid clue, but I can't shake the feeling there's more to this. The phone call, the paint, that clip you mentioned, none of it fits Lawrence alone." As if summoned by her, name Miss Jane Marple appeared at the vicarage door, her basket brimming with late roses, and her eyes alight with quiet purpose. Griselda ushered her in, grateful for her steady presence amid the chaos. "Oh, Miss Marple, you've heard about Lawrence? It's dreadful. Slack's got him locked up, and the village is in a tizzy." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting needles emerging like old friends. "Dreadful indeed," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But arrests are not convictions, Griselda. Inspector Slack is thorough, but he sees what's in front of him, not what's behind. The pistol, it's a bold clue, yet its boldness troubles me. A killer who wipes it clean, but leaves it to be found, is either careless or very clever." Leonard, pacing by the window, turned. "Clever, you think? But why frame Lawrence? If he's innocent, someone went to great lengths to point Slack his way." Miss Marple's needles clicked, a rhythmic counterpoint to her thoughts. "Framing is a strong word, Mr. Clement. It suggests intent, and intent requires motive. But sometimes a clue is less a frame and more a distraction, like my neighbour's cat chasing a leaf to avoid the mouse. The pistol draws our eyes, but what do we miss? The paint on the sill, the clip by the gate, the van that vanished. These are quieter, but they speak." Griselda's eyes widened. "You think the pistol's a red herring? But it killed Protheroe, and it's Lawrence's." "Not quite, my dear," Miss Marple said. "It may be his, but was it in his hand? A gun can be stolen, used, and returned to its place in a hedgerow, all to muddy the waters. I recall a case in my youth. A stolen brooch pinned to a maid's, apron to shift blame. The thief was the mistress, but the maid bore the suspicion. We must look beyond the obvious." The conversation was interrupted by a knock, and Mary ushered in Anne Protheroe, her pale face framed by a black veil. Her eyes, red-rimmed but resolute, sought Leonard's. "Mr. Clement, I must speak with you," she said, her voice low. "It's about Lawrence. I heard he's been arrested, and I can't let this stand. He's innocent, I know it." Leonard, startled, gestured to a chair. "Mrs. Protheroe, please sit. This is Miss Marple, a friend. You can speak freely." Anne hesitated, glancing at Miss Marple, whose mild expression belied her keen attention. Then, with a sigh, she sank into the chair, her hands clasped tightly. "Lawrence didn't kill Lucius," she said. "He couldn't have. He's not that kind of man. Someone took his pistol to make him look guilty, but I swear he was nowhere near the vicarage that evening." Griselda, impulsive as ever, leaned forward. "But how do you know, Anne? Were you with him? Oh, I don't mean to pry, but the village is saying, well, things." Anne's cheeks flushed, but she held Griselda's gaze. "I wasn't with him, but I know his heart. He's passionate, yes, but not violent. And he told me himself, days ago, that his pistol was missing. He thought it was carelessness, but now it's clear someone used it against him." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Mrs. Protheroe," she said gently, "you mentioned the pistol's loss. When did Mr. Redding tell you this, and what was his manner?" Anne's fingers twisted in her lap. "Was Sunday, at his studio. I'd gone to see his latest painting, a landscape, very striking. He mentioned the pistol in passing, said he couldn't find it, and was annoyed. He didn't seem worried, just irritated. I thought nothing of it until now." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. She noticed Anne's gloves, one slightly frayed at the thumb, a faint greenish stain on the fabric. It was subtle, but to Miss Marple it echoed the paint smudge on the sill. a whisper of connection. "And you, Mrs. Protheroe," she continued, "where were you that evening when the Colonel was killed?" Anne's composure faltered, her eyes dropping. "I told Inspector Slack. I was walking in the woods alone. I needed air. Lucius was difficult that day, and I couldn't stay in the house." Leonard, sensing her distress, spoke softly. "We understand, Mrs. Protheroe. These are trying times. If there's anything we can do—" "There is," Anne interrupted, her voice urgent. "Please, Mr. Clement, speak to Slack. Tell him Lawrence is innocent. I can't bear to see him suffer for something he didn't do." Leonard nodded, though doubt lingered. Anne's fervour for Lawrence, coupled with the village's rumours of their closeness, raised questions he dared not voice. Miss Marple, however, filed the moment away, her thoughts circling the frayed glove and Anne's insistence. As Anne left, Miss Marple rose, her basket in hand. "I must be going," she said, "but I'd like to see the garden gate again, Mr. Clement. The van troubles me, and I wonder if there's more to find." Leonard escorted her outside, where the gate creaked in the breeze. Miss Marple knelt, her sharp eyes scanning the ground. The tire mark she'd noted was faint but intact, and nearby, half buried in the soil, she spotted a small screw, glinting like a forgotten jewel. She retrieved it with a handkerchief, examining its fine threading. "A screw," she murmured, "like those in eyeglasses. Curious, don't you think?" Leonard frowned. "From the van, perhaps?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, tucking it into her basket. "Or from someone who stood here watching. In a village, Mr. Clement, nothing is lost, just misplaced." Back at the vicarage, Inspector Slack was grappling with a new complication. The telephone exchange had no record of the call to the vicarage, its rural lines too rudimentary for tracing. Frustrated, he re-examined the study, his attention drawn to the open window. A constable reported no new prints, but the paint smudge, now analysed, was oil-based, common in artists' studios. Slack's suspicions hardened around Lawrence, yet the pistol's clean surface and its odd placement nagged at him. A killer so meticulous would not be so careless, unless the carelessness was deliberate. The village, meanwhile, churned with its own discoveries. Mrs. Lestrange, seen again near the church, drew whispers, her aloofness now sinister in the villagers' eyes. Mr. Hawes, the curate, collapsed during a service, his nerves frayed, prompting Miss Weatherby to speculate about guilt weighing on his soul. And Lettice Protheroe, spotted by the woods, dropped a sketchbook that a child returned, its pages filled with angry, jagged lines. The gossip reached Miss Marple's cottage, where she sifted it with care, discarding the fanciful but noting the patterns. That evening, Miss Marple invited Dr. Haydock for supper, sensing his medical insight might clarify her thoughts. Over a simple meal of soup and bread, she shared her findings: the screw, the glove, the paint, and Anne's plea. "It's a tangle, Doctor," she said, her eyes bright. "But tangles have knots, and knots can be undone. The pistol is too loud, don't you think? It drowns out the quieter clues." Haydock, slicing his bread, nodded. Slack's fixated on Redding, and I can't blame him. The pistol's damning, and Redding's no saint. But you're right, it's too pat. The shot was close, no struggle, no noise. Whoever fired it was either known to Protheroe or invisible. And that window, open, but no footprints outside. It's a puzzle. Miss Marple's lips curved. Puzzles have edges, Doctor. The screw, for instance. Eyeglasses are personal, and not everyone wears them. And the glove, Mrs. Protheroe's, with that stain. It's like my aunt's parlour-maid, who swore she hadn't touched the jam, but her apron told the truth. Small things, but they point. Haydock leaned back, intrigued. You're building a case, Miss Marple. Who's in your sights? Not yet, she said, her voice soft. But I'm watching. People hide, but they slip, like my gardener's boy, who swore he hadn't climbed the wall, but left boot marks on the bricks. The killer slipped, Doctor, and we'll find where. As night fell, Slack stood by the vicarage gate, staring at the spot where the van had idled. The tyre mark, now photographed, offered little, but he sensed its importance. He pictured the killer, swift, silent, slipping through the window with the pistol, firing once, then vanishing. But why the vicarage? Why Protheroe? And why the phone call timed so precisely? He cursed the exchange's limitations, unaware that Miss Marple, in her cottage, was knitting a pattern that drew ever closer to the truth. Leonard, alone in the parlour, prayed for clarity, the weight of the investigation pressing on his soul. Griselda, restless, planned her tea, hoping to distract the village, and Miss Marple, her lamp burning low, turned the screw in her fingers, her mind weaving connections. The pistol was found, but the killer remained hidden, their secrets buried in St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, waiting for a keen eye to unearth them. Chapter 7. A Web of Deception. The 6th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder cast St. Mary Mead in a muted glow, the autumn sun struggling through clouds that mirrored the village's unease. The vicarage, once a beacon of pastoral serenity, stood as a grim monument to violence, its windows reflecting the comings and goings of Inspector Slack's men. The arrest of Lawrence Redding had sent ripples through the village, but the discovery of the pistol, wiped clean and discarded in a hedgerow, only deepened the mystery. To Leonard Clement, the weight of suspicion was a constant companion, his every action scrutinized by Slack's ferret-like gaze. The paint smudge, the metal clip, the screw, and the elusive phone call formed a constellation of clues. Yet their pattern eluded him, leaving him to navigate a parish now fractured by fear and rumour. Inspector Slack, undeterred by the pistols, lack of fingerprints, pressed his case against Lawrence, convinced the artist's charm masked a killer's heart. Yet doubts gnawed at him. The open window, the absence of struggle, the precision of the shot suggested a plan too meticulous for a hot-headed painter. Slack's men had scoured Lawrence's studio, finding no trace of the van or its driver, and the telephone exchange remained stubbornly silent on the mysterious call. The investigation, like the village, teetered on the edge of revelation, needing only a spark to illuminate the truth. Miss Jane Marple, ever the quiet observer, moved through St. Mary Mead with the grace of a shadow, her basket of knitting and garden tools a familiar sight. Her cottage, with its tidy rosebeds and lace curtains, was a sanctuary where she sifted the village's secrets with a jeweller's precision. The screw from the vicarage gate, the paint smudge, Anne Protheroe's frayed glove, and the metal clip formed a mental mosaic, each piece hinting at a larger design. Lawrence's arrest, while dramatic, struck her as premature, a distraction from the subtler threads she sensed weaving through the case. She knew that in a village truth often hid in plain sight, disguised as the ordinary. That morning, Miss Marple resolved to test her emerging theory, inviting Dr. Haydock and Leonard Clement to her cottage for a late breakfast. The small dining room, warmed by a fire, smelled of fresh scones and tea, a contrast to the chill of suspicion outside. Leonard, his face drawn from sleepless nights, sat by the window, while Dr. Haydock, ever pragmatic, helped himself to jam. Miss Marple, pouring tea with steady hands, began with her characteristic indirectness. "Mr. Clement, Dr. Haydock," she said, her voice soft. "This business at the vicarage has us all at 6s and 7s. But I've been thinking, as one does about the little things, the paint, the screw, the glove, the phone call. They're like my knitting, you know. Each stitch seems small, but together they make a pattern. And I believe we're close to seeing it." Leonard, stirring his tea, looked up with weary hope. "A pattern, Miss Marple. I confess I see only chaos. Slack's convinced Lawrence is guilty, but the pistol's placement, the open window, it feels staged, doesn't it? And that phone call haunts me. If it was meant to lure me away, I played the fool." Dr. Haydock nodded, his brow furrowed. "Staged is the word, Clement. The shot was clean, close range, no fuss. Protheroe didn't fight, which means he knew his killer or never saw them coming. And the pistol, wiped and tossed, it's too deliberate. Slack's got his man, but I'm not sure he's got the truth." Miss Marple's needles appeared, clicking softly as she spoke. "The truth, Doctor, is like my roses, beautiful but thorny. Let's consider what we know. The paint smudge, oil-based, suggests an artist, but not necessarily Mr. Redding. Many use such paints, and a smudge on a sill could come from a sleeve, a glove, even a tool. The screw, fine and precise, points to eyeglasses, which narrows our field. The clip, perhaps from a pen, was by the gate where the van stood, and the phone call, a woman's voice, urgent, timed to ensure Mr. Clement's absence. This they were, not random, but orchestrated." Leonard leaned forward, intrigued despite his fatigue. "Orchestrated? You mean a conspiracy, Miss Marple? More than one person?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained mild. "Not a conspiracy, in the grand sense, Mr. Clement, but a plan, yes. The vicarage was chosen for its accessibility. Parishioners, tradesmen, even strangers passed through. Yet the killer knew Protheroe's schedule, your habits, and the village's rhythms. That suggests intimacy, someone close to the Colonel's circle, and the van, so fleeting, feels like a stage prop, there to be seen but not traced." Dr. Haydock set down his cup. His interest piqued. "You're painting a picture, Miss Marple. The van's driver, then. Could they be the killer or an accomplice? And the phone call. Do you think it was Anne Protheroe? Her glove, that stain, it's hard to ignore." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. "Mrs. Protheroe is a possibility, Doctor, but not the only one. The glove is telling, but gloves are borrowed, stained, discarded. The voice, though, soft, hurried, familiar. To Mr. Clement, perhaps, if he'd thought longer. In my experience, such calls are like my friend's parlour game, where a whisper hides the speaker, but not their intent. We must consider who benefits from Protheroe's death, and who had the nerve to act." Leonard rubbed his temples, the weight of the clues overwhelming. "But who, Miss Marple? Anne, perhaps, for freedom from a harsh marriage. Lawrence, for love or land. lettuce for inheritance, though she seems too vague. Even Mrs. Lestrange, with her odd walks or whores, so nervous. It's a labyrinth. Miss Marple smiled, resuming her knitting. A labyrinth, yes, but every labyrinth has a path. Let's follow the clues. The paint suggests proximity to art, but not necessarily guilt. The screw points to someone with glasses. Mr. Redding wears them, as does Mr. Hawes, and I've seen Mrs. Price Ridley adjust hers. The clip near the van hints at someone careless in haste, and the phone call, timed to clear the vicarage, implies a woman with knowledge of your routine, Mr. Clement. These threads weave a web, and at its centre is someone who knew Protheroe's movements intimately. Dr. Haydock leaned back, impressed. You're narrowing it down, Miss Marple, but we need proof. Slack's got the pistol, but no prints, no witnesses. The van's a ghost. No one's come forward, and the tyre mark's too common to trace. What's your next move? Miss Marple's lips curved, a faint but knowing smile. Not a move, Doctor, but an observation. People reveal themselves, you know, when they think they're safe. Like my gardener's lad, who swore he hadn't eaten the plums, but left pips in his pocket. We must watch and listen and let the web tighten. The conversation ended as Leonard was called to a parish matter, and Dr. Haydock returned to his rounds. Miss Marple, alone, walked to the vicarage, her basket swinging. The garden gate where the van had idled drew her eye, and she paused, examining the ground. A faint scuff mark, overlooked by Slack's men, caught her attention. A shoe's edge, small and narrow, like a woman's. She filed it away, her mind turning to Anne Protheroe's fervent defence of Lawrence, and the stained glove that echoed. The paint smudge. At the vicarage, Inspector Slack was grappling with a new lead. A constable had interviewed the postmistress, who recalled a call placed from a public box near the Blue Boar, just before 6 on the murder evening. The caller, a woman, had spoken briefly, her voice muffled. The box, used by villagers and passers-by, offered no clear suspect, but Slack sensed its link to the vicarage call. He dispatched a man to dust for prints, though he doubted the killer's carelessness extended that far. The village, meanwhile, churned with its own discoveries. Mrs. Lestrange, seen buying a train ticket at the station, sparked rumours of flight, though she returned to her cottage by dusk. Mr. Hawes, recovering from his collapse, confided to Miss Weatherby that Protheroe had once accused him of mishandling church funds, a charge that left him shaken. Lettice Protheroe, spotted by the river, threw stones with a ferocity that belied her dreamy air, prompting Miss Hartnell to whisper of repressed rage. The gossip reached Miss Marple's ears, each tidbit a brushstroke in her mental canvas. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the church, where Leonard was polishing the brass, seeking solace in routine. The cool stone walls offered a brief respite, and Miss Marple's presence was a balm. "Mr. Clement," she said, settling on a pew, "you're bearing a heavy load, but the truth is near. I feel it. The screw, the glove, the scuff mark, they're like my roses, each a clue to the gardener's hand." Leonard, wiping his hands, managed a smile. "You see more than Slack, Miss Marple. He's blind to anything beyond Lawrence. But that phone call, if it was a woman who? Anne? Lettice? Someone we haven't considered." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "A woman, yes, but not necessarily the killer. In a village, roles shift. Accomplice, distraction, protector. I recall a case in my youth, a stolen necklace blamed on a maid. But the true thief was her mistress, shielding a lover. The call, the van, the pistol, they're parts of a play, Mr. Clement, and the actors know their lines. As they spoke, Griselda burst in, her cheeks flushed. "Miss Marple, Len, you'll never guess. Mrs. Price Ridley's telling everyone she saw Anne drop a letter in the postbox, addressed to Lawrence, the day before the murder. She swears it was a love letter. Oh, it's scandalous." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her voice remained mild. "A letter, Griselda. Interesting. Mrs. Price Ridley sees much, though her lens is often coloured. Still, a letter to Mr. Redding, so close to the murder, is a thread worth pulling." Leonard frowned, troubled. Anne and Lawrence, could they have planned it together? But why the vicarage? Why my study? Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. The vicarage, Mr. Clement, is both public and private, a stage where anyone might enter, yet few are noticed. The killer chose it for its ambiguity, I think, and your absence was ensured by that call. The web is tight, but not complete. We need one more stitch. That evening Miss Marple walked to the Blue Boar, where the public phone box stood. The inn's lights spilled onto the lane, and she examined the box, its glass smudged but intact. A faint scent of perfume lingered, floral and familiar, though she couldn't place it. She noted the box's view of the vicarage, a clear line to the gate where the van had idled. Returning home, she lit her lamp, her knitting a soft rhythm against the quiet. The screw, the glove, the scuff mark, the perfume. Each was a note in a melody, and Miss Marple sensed the tune was nearly complete. At the vicarage, Slack stood, in the study, staring at the desk where Protheroe had fallen. The paint smudge, now a chemical match to Lawrence's supplies, strengthened his case. Yet the absence of prints and the open window gnawed at him. He pictured the killer, silent, swift, slipping through the window with the pistol, firing once, then vanishing. But the van, the call, the screw, they didn't fit Lawrence alone. He cursed the village's reticence, unaware that Miss Marple, in her cottage, was weaving a net that would soon ensnare the truth. Leonard, alone in the parlour, prayed for peace, the vicarage's violation a wound that refused to heal. Griselda, planning her tea, hoped to quell the gossip, though her heart raced with questions. And Miss Marple, her lamp burning low, turned the screw in her fingers, her mind tracing the web's final strands. The deception was intricate, but no web could hide forever, not from a village spinster with a knack for seeing what others missed. Chapter 8. The False Confession. The 7th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder cloaked St. Mary Mead in a restless twilight, the village caught in a web of suspicion that tightened with each passing hour. The vicarage, its ivy-clad walls now, a backdrop to tragedy, stood as a silent sentinel, its rooms still echoing with the footsteps of Inspector Slack's men. Lawrence Redding's arrest had stirred the village like a stone dropped in a still pond, but the ripples of doubt, fueled by the wiped pistol, the paint smudge, the screw, and the elusive van, kept the truth just out of reach. Leonard Clement, burdened by his unwitting role in the drama, moved through his parish duties with a heaviness that no prayer could lift. The phone call, the metal clip, and the scuff mark Miss Marple had noted haunted him, fragments of a puzzle that refused to align. Inspector Slack, his ferret-like intensity undimmed, pursued every lead with dogged determination. Yet the case's complexity frustrated him. The pistol, confirmed as Lawrence's, was a damning clue, but its clean surface and odd placement in the hedgerow suggested a mind too calculating for the artist's impulsive nature. The phone call, untraceable through the rural exchange, nagged at him, as did the faint perfume in the public phone box, a detail his constable had reported with a shrug. Slack sensed the killer was close, hidden among St. Mary Mead's familiar faces. But the village's reticence mocked his efforts. Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming air and sharp eyes, continued her quiet vigil, her cottage a haven where she sifted clues like seeds from chaff. The screw, the frayed glove, the scuff mark, and the perfume formed a delicate tapestry in her mind, each thread pointing to a design both bold and subtle. Lawrence's arrest, while logical, struck her as a misstep. The pistol, a beacon that drew attention from quieter truths. She knew that in a village secrets were like weeds, persistent, concealed, but rooted in the everyday. As she knitted by her fire, her thoughts circled Anne Protheroe's fervent defence of Lawrence and the faint stain on her glove, a whisper of connection to the paint smudge. That morning, the village was jolted by a new development. Anne Protheroe, pale and resolute, marched into Much Benham's police station and confessed to Inspector Slack, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The news spread like wildfire, reaching the vicarage by noon, where Griselda, arranging linens, gasped as Mary relayed the gossip from the post office. "Anne confessed," Griselda cried, dropping a sheet. "Mary says she told Slack she shot Lucius herself in a fit of rage. Oh, Len, it can't be true. She's so gentle, so refined. Why would she say such a thing?" Leonard, polishing his spectacles, frowned, his heart sinking. "Confessed? That's extraordinary. Annie's been under strain, but murder? It doesn't fit. Slack must be sceptical, surely." As if on cue, a constable arrived summoning Leonard to the station. "Inspector wants your input, Vicar," the young man said, his tone clipped. "Mrs. Protheroe's story's got holes, and he reckons you might know something." Leonard, reluctant but duty-bound, followed, leaving Griselda to fret. The station, Slack awaited in a cramped office, his desk littered with reports. Anne sat across from him, her black dress stark against her pallor, her eyes fixed on the floor. Slack's expression was a mix of triumph and frustration, his pen poised over a notebook. "Mr. Clement," Slack began, "Mrs. Protheroe here claims she killed her husband, says she took Redding's pistol, snuck into your study, and shot Protheroe. Wants to clear Redding's name, she says, but her story's shaky, and I'm not buying it. Thought you might shed light, seeing as it happened in your house." Leonard, startled, glanced at Anne, who avoided his gaze. "Mrs. Protheroe, is this true?" he asked gently. "You must know how serious this is." Anne's voice when she spoke was low but firm. "It's true, Mr. Clement. I couldn't bear Lucius's cruelty any longer. That evening I took Lawrence's pistol. I knew where he kept it. I went to the vicarage through the garden, entered by the window, and shot him. I didn't mean to, not at first, but he was so hateful, and I lost control." Slack's eyes narrowed, his pen scratching. "A fine tale, Mrs. Protheroe, but it doesn't hold water. You say you climbed through the window. But you described the study wrong. Said the desk faced the door when it's against the wall, and the pistol was found in a hedgerow, not where you claim you dropped it. Care to explain?" Anne's composure wavered, her hands twisting. "I was upset, confused. I don't remember clearly, but I did it, Inspector. Let Lawrence go. He's innocent." Slack leaned back, his smirk cold. "Noble, but I'm not convinced. You're protecting someone, aren't you? Redding, most likely. Lovers, are you? Planned it together, maybe?" Anne's cheeks flushed, but she shook her head. "No, it was me alone. Lawrence knew nothing." Leonard, listening, felt a pang of doubt. Anne's confession, so sudden and detailed, seemed rehearsed, yet her distress was real. He recalled Miss Marple's words about distractions, and the glove with its greenish stain loomed in his mind. "Inspector," he ventured, "might I suggest consulting Miss Marple? She's insightful, and she's been following the case closely." Slack's brows rose, but he nodded grudgingly. "That old lady? Fine, if you think she's got something to add. But I'm keeping Mrs. Protheroe here till we sort this mess." Leonard returned to the vicarage, where Miss Marple was already waiting, summoned by Griselda's frantic note. The parlour, cluttered, with tea-trays, felt stifling, but Miss Marple's calm presence was a balm. Griselda, pacing, recounted Anne's confession, her voice rising. "It's madness, Miss Marple. Anne, a murderer? She's covering for Lawrence, isn't she? Oh, what a tangle!" Miss Marple, knitting by the fire, listened with her usual serenity. "A tangle, indeed, Griselda," she said. "But Mrs. Protheroe's confession is like my knitting when I drop a stitch, bold but flawed. A true confession fits the facts, but hers unravels under scrutiny. The desk, the pistol's location, the lack of witnesses, it's a noble lie meant to shield someone." Leonard, sinking into a chair, nodded. "Slack sees it too. He thinks she's protecting Lawrence. But her story's so weak, it's almost deliberate. Could they have planned it together, as he suspects?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes thoughtful. "Planned, perhaps, but not as Slack imagines. Let's consider the clues anew. The paint smudge, oil-based, links to an artist's world, but not solely Mr. Redding's. The screw, from eyeglasses, narrows our suspects. Mr. Redding, Mr. Hawes, Mrs. Price Ridley all wear them. The scuff mark, small and narrow, suggests a woman's shoe. The clip by the gate hints at haste. And the phone call, a woman's voice timed to clear the vicarage. Mrs. Protheroe's glove, stained with paint, ties her to the scene, but her confession omits these details. Why? Griselda's eyes widened. You think she's lying to save Lawrence, but knows more than she's saying? Oh, Miss Marple, it's like a play, with everyone acting a part. Miss Marple smiled faintly. A play, yes, Griselda, and plays have directors. Mrs. Protheroe's confession is a sacrifice, but it protects the wrong person, I think. The phone call is the key. It required knowledge of Mr. Clement's routine and Protheroe's plans. Only someone close to both could time it so. And the van, so conveniently noticed, feels like a prop, meant to distract. Leonard rubbed his temples, the clues swirling. But who, Miss Marple? Anne's confession throws everything into chaos. If she's lying, who made the call? Lettice? Mrs. Lestrange? Someone we haven't suspected." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. "Not chaos, Mr. Clement, but clarity. A false confession is a mirror. It reflects the truth, but backward. Mrs. Protheroe knows something, perhaps not the whole, but enough to risk this lie. I recall a case in my youth, a girl who confessed to stealing to save her brother, but the true thief was her suitor. The lie revealed the connection. We must look at those closest to Protheroe, Anne, Lettice, Lawrence, and those who seem peripheral, like Miss Lestrange or Mr. Hawes. Griselda, restless, poured more tea. What about the perfume in the phone box? Mary mentioned it to me this morning. Floral, she said, like what Anne wears. Could that prove she made the call? Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Perfume is telling, Griselda, but not conclusive. Many women use floral scents, and a phone box is public. Yet it's a thread, like the glove. In my experience, such clues are like my neighbour's cat, leaving paw prints where it shouldn't. We must follow them. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Haydock's arrival, his face grim. "Heard about Anne's confession," he said, accepting a cup. "Slack's in a state, thinks it's a ploy, but he's holding her for now. Reading's still locked up, and the village is ready to riot. What's your take, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her voice calm. "A ploy, yes, Doctor, but not a simple one. Mrs. Protheroe's confession is a shield, but it cracks under pressure. The desk's position, the pistols, journey to the hedgerow, these she cannot explain. The true killer planned carefully, using the vicarage's openness, the window's latch, the phone call's timing, the van, the screw, the scuff mark. They're traces of that plan, left by someone who moved with purpose." Haydock nodded, impressed. "You're building a case, Miss Marple. The phone call's the linchpin, isn't it? If we could prove who made it, we'd have our killer, or their accomplice." Miss Marple's lips curved. "Not prove, Doctor, but suspect. Proof comes later, when the web tightens. For now, we watch. People slip, you know, like my maid's cousin, who swore she hadn't touched the silver, but left a cloth smudged with polish. The killer slipped, and we'll find where." That afternoon Miss Marple visited the vicarage garden, her basket in hand. The gate, where the van had stood, was quiet, but she examined the scuff mark again, noting its clarity in the dry soil. Nearby, a blade of grass bore a faint smear, greenish, like the paint smudge. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind circling Anne's glove and the perfume. The phone box, she decided, warranted another look. At the Blue Boar, the phone box stood in a corner, its glass dulled by dust. Miss Marple stepped inside, the floral scent fainter now, but distinct. She examined the receiver, finding a hair, long, dark, curled, caught in the cradle. It was a small thing, but to Miss Marple it was a beacon. She wrapped it carefully, her thoughts turning to Anne's dark hair, and Lettice's lighter locks. The village's women, she knew, were not all what they seemed. Back at the vicarage, Slack was interrogating Lettice Protheroe, whose vague answers frustrated him. "You were at your friend's, you say," he barked, "but Esther says you left by 6. Where'd you go, Miss Protheroe?" Lettice, twirling a strand of hair, shrugged. "I walked, I think. The woods, maybe. I don't watch clocks, Inspector." Slack's patience snapped. "You're hiding something, girl. Your stepmother's confessed, your father's dead, and you're playing the fool. Spill it, or I'll haul you in." Lettuce's eyes flashed, a rare spark. "I'm not hiding anything. Anne's wrong. She didn't kill him. She's just upset. Leave her alone." Slack dismissed her, his suspicions deepening. Lettuce's evasiveness, like Anne's confession, felt like a performance. But for whom? He turned to the hair from the phone box, sent for analysis, though he doubted it would yield a name. The village, he cursed, was a maze of half-truths, each resident a potential liar. The gossip, meanwhile, surged. Mrs. Price Ridley, at the post office, declared Anne's confession proof of her guilt, while Miss Weatherby whispered of Lettuce's secret meetings with a stranger. Mrs. Lestrange, seen sketching by the river, drew renewed suspicion, her solitude now sinister. Mr. Hawes, recovering, avoided the vicarage, his absence noted by Miss Hartnell as cowardly. Miss Marple, returning home, lit her lamp and resumed her knitting, the hair, the grass, the screw, and the glove arrayed in her mind. She thought of Anne's sacrifice, Lettuce's defiance, and the phone call's urgency. The web was tightening, she sensed, but one thread remained loose. She closed her eyes, picturing the vicarage at dusk, the van's shadow, the window's latch. The truth, like her roses, was budding, needing only a gentle hand to bloom. At the vicarage, Leonard prayed for resolution. The false confession a new wound. Griselda, planning her tea, hoped to quell the rumours, though her heart raced with doubt. Slack, in his office, stared at the pistol, its silence mocking him. And Miss Marple, her needles clicking, wove the final strands, knowing the killer's slip was near, hidden in St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, waiting for her to find it. Chapter 9. Unraveling Motives. The 8th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder wrapped St. Mary Mead in a tense hush, the village's usual bustle subdued by the weight of unanswered questions. The vicarage, its once welcoming facade now a grim landmark, stood at the heart of the mystery, its study a silent witness to the violence that had shattered the parish's peace. Anne Protheroe's confession, so startling and yet so flawed, had thrown the investigation into disarray, leaving Inspector Slack grasping at threads that refused to hold. Lawrence Redding, still detained, remained the prime suspect. But the wiped pistol, the paint smudge, the screw, the scuff mark, and the faint perfume in the phone box hinted at a deeper, more intricate plot. Leonard Clement, tormented by his role as unwitting host to the crime, found his faith tested, each clue a reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the village's tranquil surface. Inspector Slack, his sharp features etched with frustration, paced the Much Benham police station, his mind wrestling with Anne's confession. Her story, stealing Lawrence's pistol, entering the vicarage through the window, shooting her husband in a fit of rage, crumbled under scrutiny. The misdescribed study, the pistol's journey to the hedgerow, and the absence of witnesses undermined her claim, yet her fervour suggested a truth she dared not fully reveal. Slack suspected she was shielding Lawrence, perhaps as his accomplice, but the lack of concrete evidence gnawed at him. The phone call, the van, and the hair from the phone box were tantalizing, but the rural exchange's limitations and the village's tight-lipped residents thwarted his efforts. Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet demeanour and piercing insight, continued her subtle investigation, her cottage a sanctuary where she wove the case's fragments into a coherent pattern. The screw, the frayed glove, the scuff mark, the hair, and the grass smear formed a delicate mosaic, each piece a whisper of the killer's movements. Anne's confession to Miss Marple was a desperate act, not of guilt, but of protection, its flaws revealing more than its words. The perfume, floral and familiar, tugged at her memory, as did the scuff mark's narrow tread, suggesting a woman's presence at the gate. As she knitted by her window, her thoughts circled the relationships binding Protheroe's circle: Anne, Lawrence, Lettice, and the outliers, like Mrs. Lestrange and Mr. Hawes, whose shadows lingered on the edges. Morning, Miss Marple resolved to clarify her theory, inviting Griselda and Dr. Haydock for an early tea at her cottage. The small parlour, aglow with firelight, smelled of lavender and freshly baked biscuits, a haven from the village's turmoil. Griselda, her usual vivacity tempered by worry, sat by the hearth, while Dr. Haydock, his medical bag at his feet, sipped tea with a thoughtful air. Miss Marple, pouring with steady hands, began with her characteristic indirectness. "Griselda, Dr. Haydock," she said, her voice gentle, "this dreadful business has us all on edge, but I believe we're nearing the heart of it. Mrs. Protheroe's confession, so brave and yet so wrong, is like my knitting when I've miscounted stitches. It looks right at a glance, but it won't hold. The clues, the screw, the glove, the hair, the scuff mark, tell a different story, one of careful planning, not sudden rage." Griselda, twisting a napkin, leaned forward. "Planning, Miss Marple? You mean Anne's lying to save Lawrence? But someone else planned it. Oh, it's too awful. Who could be so cold?" Dr. Haydock, stirring his tea, nodded. "Cold's the word, Griselda. The shot was precise. No struggle, no noise. The killer knew Protheroe's habits, the vicarage's layout, and Leonard's routine. Anne's confession doesn't explain the wiped pistol or the hedgerow. And that phone call, timed to get Leonard out, it's the work of someone with nerve and knowledge." Miss Marple's needles appeared, clicking softly as she spoke. "Knowledge, indeed, Doctor. Let's lay out the threads. The paint smudge, oil-based, suggests an artist's touch, but not necessarily Mr. Redding's. Such paint is common. The screw, from eyeglasses, points to a few: Mr. Redding, Mr. Hawes, Mrs. Price Ridley. The scuff mark, narrow and small, implies a woman's shoe, perhaps at the gate where the van stood. The hair, dark and curled from the phone box, could be Mrs. Protheroe's, but others share her colouring. The grass smear, greenish, matches the glove stain. And the phone call, a woman's voice, urgent, ensuring the vicarage was empty. These are not chance, but a design. Leonard, absent due to a parish call, had left Griselda to relay his latest concern. The perfume, which Mary had mentioned again, seemed to match Anne's scent, a detail that troubled him. Miss Marple listened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Perfume is suggestive, Griselda," she said, "but not definitive. Many women favour floral notes, and a phone box is a public place. Yet it aligns with the hair, the scuff mark, the glove. I believe we're dealing with a partnership. Two minds, perhaps, one to act, one to distract." Dr. Haydock set down his cup, intrigued. "A partnership? You're thinking Anne and Lawrence, with Anne's confession as a cover. Or someone else using Anne's loyalty to shield them? Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. Not quite, Doctor. Mrs. Protheroe's confession protects Mr. Redding, but it's too frail to be the whole truth. I suspect a deeper motive, rooted in love or desperation. Protheroe was a tyrant, his wife trapped, his daughter stifled, his enemies provoked. Consider the van. It appeared, was seen, then vanished. A distraction, like my neighbour's dog barking to hide a thief. The phone call lured Mr. Clement away. The pistol implicated Mr. Redding, but the screw, the scuff mark, the hair, they point elsewhere, to someone who moved unseen. Griselda's eyes widened. Unseen? You mean someone like Mrs. Lestrange? She's always skulking about, and Miss Hartnell swears she saw her by the vicarage that night. Or Mr. Hawes, he's so jumpy it's unnatural. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Mrs. Lestrange is curious, Griselda, but her solitude may be innocence, not guilt. Mr. Hawes's nerves suggest fear, not necessarily of discovery. No, I'm thinking closer to Protheroe's heart, his household, his intimates. Anne and Lawrence are bound by affection, the village says, and lettuce, so vague, hides a sharp mind. The motive lies there, in love twisted by control. Dr. Haydock leaned forward, his voice low. You're saying Anne and Lawrence planned it, with Anne's confession as a fallback? The glove, the hair, the phone call, they tie to her, don't they? And Lawrence, with his glasses, could have dropped that screw. Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice calm. A possibility, Doctor, but not the only one. The glove stain matches the paint, yes, but gloves are shared, borrowed, planted. The hair could be Anne's or another's, lettuce, perhaps, or even Mrs. Price Ridley, though her spite seems more vocal than violent. The screw implicates glasses, but many wear them. The phone call, though, is the pivot. A woman, knowing Protheroe's plans, called to clear the vicarage. Anne is likely, but lettuce, young and overlooked, could surprise us. In my experience, the quiet ones, like my friend's parlour-maid who stole a brooch to spite her mistress, are often the boldest. Griselda, restless, poured more tea. Lettuce? She's so dreamy, I can't see her planning anything. But she hated her father. Everyone says so. Could she have helped Anne? Maybe without knowing the whole plan. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A sharp question, Griselda. Lettuce's sketches, her wanderings, they suggest a mind at odds with itself. But we mustn't leap. The van troubles me. It was seen by Mary, yet no one claims it. A tradesman would come forward unless they were part of the plot. And the scuff mark, so delicate, points to a woman at the gate, perhaps watching, perhaps driving. I picture two hands, one to fire, one to guide. Dr. Haydock rubbed his chin, impressed. You're weaving a tight net, Miss Marple. Let's say Anne and Lawrence are our pair. Lawrence shoots using his pistol, enters through the window, leaves the paint smudge. Anne makes the call, drives the van as a decoy, drops the screw in her haste. The hair's hers, the glove's hers, the scuff mark's hers. She confesses to save Lawrence when he's arrested, but gets the details wrong because she wasn't in the study. Sound plausible? Miss Marple nodded slowly, her needles clicking. Plausible, Doctor, but not perfect. The pistol's placement in the hedgerow suggests a third hand, someone who moved it after the shot, and the screw, eyeglasses are personal but not unique. Mr. Hawes wears them, and his fear is palpable. Mrs. Lestrange, too, has been seen with spectacles, though she's elusive. The phone call's timing, though, is Anne's strongest link. Her knowledge of Protheroe's movements fits. Yet Lettice, living under his thumb, knew his habits too. We need a test, a way to see who flinches. Griselda clapped her hands, excited. A test? Like what, Miss Marple? A trap to catch them out? Miss Marple's lips curved. A faint but knowing smile. Not a trap, Griselda, but a nudge. People reveal themselves when pressed, like my gardener's boy, who swore he hadn't climbed the apple tree, but left a torn shirt on the branch. We must create a moment, a question that stirs the truth. The tea ended as Dr. Haydock was called to a patient, and Griselda rushed to the vicarage to prepare for her charity tea, hoping to quell the gossip. Miss Marple, alone, walked to the churchyard, where the vicarage gate stood in quiet reproach. She examined the scuff mark again, noting its angle, as if someone had pivoted sharply, perhaps startled. The grass smear, now dried, matched the paint's hue, a silent echo of the glove. She pictured the scene. The van idling, a woman's shoe at the gate, a hurried call from the Blue Boar. The killer's plan was bold, but its edges frayed, leaving traces only a keen eye could see. At the vicarage, Inspector Slack was grappling with Anne's confession, his scepticism hardening. He re-interviewed Lettice, whose vagueness now seemed calculated, her eyes darting when he pressed about the phone call. "I don't know anything," she insisted, twisting a bracelet. "Anne's confused, that's all. She didn't do it." Slack, exasperated, turned to Mrs. Lestrange, summoned from her cottage. The widow, her dark eyes guarded, admitted to walking near the vicarage that evening, but denied entering the grounds. "I keep to myself, Inspector," she said, her voice cool. "I had no quarrel with Protheroe." Slack, unconvinced, noted her spectacles, their fine frames a match for the screws threading. Yet her alibi, corroborated by a neighbour who saw her return home by 7, held firm. He released her, his suspicions shifting back to Anne and Lawrence, though the hair's analysis, human, dark, no roots, offered little clarity. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with fresh rumours. Mrs. Price Ridley, at the Blue Boar, declared Anne's confession a lover's pact, while Miss Weatherby whispered of Lettice's secret sketches, found by a maid, depicting a man resembling Protheroe in angry lines. Mr. Hawes, avoiding the church, was seen praying alone by the river, his solitude fueling Miss Hartnell's talk of guilt's burden. The gossip reached Miss Marple, each tidbit a brushstroke in her mental portrait. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where Leonard was sorting parish letters, his face pale. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "you're a godsend. Anne's confession has turned everything upside down, and Slack's no closer to the truth. I keep thinking of that phone call. If it was Anne, why confess so poorly?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming. "Poorly, yes, Mr. Clement, because it's not her truth. The phone call was her hand, I believe, but the shot was another's. Picture it. Anne, trapped by Protheroe's cruelty, loves Lawrence, who chafes under the Colonel's threats. They plan. A call to clear you, a van to distract, a shot through the window. Lawrence fires, leaves the paint, drops the screw. Anne drives, marks the gate, wears the glove. The pistol is hidden, then planted to shift blame. Anne confesses when Lawrence is caught, but her heart betrays her details. Leonard stared stunned. "You've unravelled it, Miss Marple. But proof? Slack won't act on theory, and the village is tearing itself apart." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. "Proof comes, Mr. Clement, when the guilty slip, like my friend's cook, who swore she hadn't touched the wine, but left a cork in her pocket. We need a moment, a question to spark the slip. I'm thinking of Griselda's tea. Everyone will be there watching each other. A word, a hint, might loosen the thread." As evening fell, Miss Marple walked to the Blue Boar, the phone box's faint perfume still lingering. She pictured Anne, or perhaps Lettice, dialing in haste, her voice soft but urgent. The hair, the scuff mark, the glove, they pointed to a woman, but the screw suggested a man, a pair moving in tandem. Returning home, she lit her lamp, her knitting a soft rhythm against the quiet. The motive, love, freedom, revenge, was clear, but the hands that wove it were not. She closed her eyes, picturing the vicarage at dusk, the van's hum, the window's latch. The truth, like her roses, was blooming, needing only a gentle nudge to open fully. At the vicarage, Leonard prayed for clarity, Anne's confession a new weight on his soul. Griselda, planning her tea, hoped to soothe the village, though her heart raced with questions. Slack, in his office, stared at the pistol, its silence a challenge. And Miss Marple, her needles clicking, wove the final strands, knowing the killer's slip was imminent, hidden in St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, waiting for her to seize it. Chapter 10. The trap, the 9th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder, draped St. Mary Mead in a deceptive calm, the village's surface tranquillity masking a current of unease that rippled through its lanes. The vicarage, its once inviting rooms, now scarred by the memory of violence, stood as a sombre reminder of the crime that had fractured the parish. Anne Protheroe's false confession had muddled Inspector Slack's investigation, while Lawrence Redding's detention kept the village's gossip mills churning. The pistol, the paint smudge, the screw, the scuff mark, the hair, and the faint perfume in the phone box formed a constellation of clues, yet their alignment remained elusive, taunting Slack with a truth just beyond his grasp. Leonard Clement, burdened by the violation of his home and the weight of suspicion, found his pastoral duties a hollow comfort, each clue a splinter in his conscience. Inspector Slack, his wiry frame taut with determination, wrestled with the case's contradictions. Anne's confession, riddled with errors, was a clear attempt to shield Lawrence, but its fragility suggested she knew more than she admitted. The phone call, untraceable, and the van, unclaimed, pointed to a meticulous plan, yet the pistols, careless placement in the hedgerow clashed with such precision. Slack's men had scoured the village, finding no trace of the van's driver, and the hair from the phone box, dark, curled, human, offered no definitive match. The perfume, floral and elusive, tugged at his instincts, but without a suspect to tie it to, it was a dead end. Slack sensed the killer was a local, woven into St. Mary Mead's fabric, but the village's reticence was a wall he couldn't breach. Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming presence and razor-sharp mind, continued her quiet pursuit of the truth. Her cottage a haven where she pieced together the case's fragments, the screw, The frayed glove, the scuff mark, the hair, the grass smear, and the perfume formed a delicate web in her thoughts, each thread a hint of the killer's movements. Amy's confession to Miss Marple was a selfless act, its flaws a mirror reflecting a deeper conspiracy. The scuff mark's narrow tread and the hair's dark curl suggested a woman's role, while the screw pointed to a man with glasses, Lawrence, perhaps, or Mr. Hawes. The van, seen but unclaimed, was a deliberate distraction, its driver a shadow in the plot. As she knitted by her fire, Miss Marple resolved to test her theory, sensing that a gentle nudge could unravel the guilty. That morning, Miss Marple proposed a subtle stratagem, enlisting Griselda's help to host a charity tea at the Vicarage, an event that would draw the village's key players. "A gathering, Griselda," she said over breakfast at the Vicarage, her voice soft but purposeful. People talk freely at such affairs, and a word, a glance, may betray what they hide. We need a moment to stir the truth, like my gardener's rake uncovering roots. Griselda, her eyes bright with excitement, clapped her hands. "A tea! Oh, Miss Marple, it's perfect. Everyone will come. Anne, Lawrence, if he's released, Lettice, even Mrs. Lestrange. I'll invite them all, and we'll watch them like hawks. But what's the nudge? A question? A clue?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile faint. "A hint, Griselda, nothing more. A story, perhaps, about a witness to the van's driver, a man with glasses, seen by the gate. It's not true, but the guilty will react, like my neighbour's cat flinching at a sudden noise. We must be subtle and watchful." Leonard, joining them, frowned, his face etched with worry. "A falsehood, Miss Marple. It feels unchristian. But if it reveals the truth, I'll trust you." Slack's at a standstill, and Anne's confession has only deepened the chaos. I keep thinking of that phone call. If it was Anne, why risk so much for Lawrence? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained mild. "Love, Mr. Clement, is a powerful spur. Mrs. Protheroe's confession is a shield, but it protects more than Mr. Redding, I think. The phone call, the van, the pistol, they're parts of a duet, two voices in harmony. One fired, one guided, and the village's rhythms hid their steps. We need only a discord to make them falter." The tea was set for the following afternoon, and Griselda threw herself into preparations, her energy a counterpoint to the village's gloom. Invitations went to Anne, released on bail after her confession's collapse. Lawrence also bailed, pending further evidence. Lettice, who accepted with a vague nod, Mrs. Lestrange, who agreed with cool reserve, and Mr. Hawes, whose nervous assent surprised no one. The village buzzed with anticipation, Mrs. Price Ridley predicting revelations, and Miss Weatherby whispering of hidden passions. That evening, Miss Marple visited the vicarage garden, her basket in hand, to review the scene. The gate, where the van had idled, was quiet, but the scuff mark remained, its narrow tread a silent accusation. She knelt, noting a faint indentation nearby, as if a small object had been dropped and retrieved. The grass smear, now faded, still echoed the paint smudge, and she pictured a woman, Anne, perhaps, or Lettice, standing by the gate, her shoe marking the soil as she watched the vicarage. The screw, tucked in her tin box, suggested a man, and the hair from the phone box pointed to a woman's hand. The pieces were aligning, but a final spark was needed. At the police station, Slack was grappling with a new report. The hair, analysed further, showed traces of a floral scent matching the phone box's perfume. It wasn't enough to name a suspect, but it strengthened his suspicion of Anne, whose scent Mary had noted. He re-examined the pistol, its clean surface a taunt, and the paint smudge now linked to Lawrence's studio supplies. Yet the van eluded him, its tyre mark too common to trace. Slack cursed the village's secrets, unaware that Miss Marple's tea would soon force them into the open. The next day the vicarage drawing-room was transformed, its tables laden with scones, jam, and Griselda's best china. The air hummed, with chatter as villagers arrived, their polite smiles masking avid curiosity. Anne Protheroe, her face pale but composed, sat near the window, her dark eyes scanning the room. Lawrence, released on bail, stood by the fireplace, his charm subdued, but his gaze sharp. Lettice, slouched in a corner, toyed with a teaspoon, her expression distant. Mrs. Lestrange, elegant in grey, sipped tea with detached grace, while Mr. Hawes, his hands trembling, hovered near the door. Mrs. Price Ridley and Miss Weatherby, ever vigilant, whispered in a corner, their eyes darting to Anne and Lawrence. Miss Marple, seated by Griselda, knitted quietly, her mild demeanour a contrast to her keen observation. She noted Anne's stiff posture, Lawrence's clenched jaw, Lettice's restless fingers, and Hawes's pallor. The tea progressed with Griselda's laughter and Leonard's gentle hosting keeping the mood light. Then, as planned, Miss Marple seized her moment, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "Griselda, dear," she said, pausing her knitting, "I heard the oddest thing from Mrs. Archer yesterday. She mentioned a witness to that van by the vicarage gate, the night of the murder. A man with glasses, she said, seen lingering just before the shot. Quite peculiar, don't you think?" The room stilled, the clink of cups fading. Anne's teacup rattled in its saucer, her eyes flicking to Lawrence. Lawrence's hand, reaching for a scone, froze, then trembled, spilling crumbs. Lettice's spoon clattered to the table, her face paling. Mrs. Lestrange's lips tightened, but she remained composed, while Hawes coughed violently, his napkin pressed to his mouth. Mrs. Price Ridley, sensing drama, leaned forward, but Miss Marple's expression remained bland, her needles resuming their rhythm. Griselda, playing her part, gasped, "A witness, Miss Marple? Why, that's extraordinary. Did Mrs. Archer say who it was?" Miss Marple shook her head, her voice soft. "No, dear, just a man with glasses. It may be nothing, of course. Villages are full of stories, like my friend's tale of a ghost that was only a loose shutter. But it's curious, isn't it?" The moment passed, but its impact lingered. Anne excused herself, claiming a headache, and left with a hurried step. Lawrence lingered, his charm strained, before slipping out to the garden. Lettice, silent, resumed her tea, her eyes darting to the door. Hawes, visibly shaken, mumbled an apology and fled. Mrs. Lestrange, unmoved, complimented Griselda's scones and stayed till the end. After the tea, Miss Marple confided to Leonard and Griselda under the parlour, her voice low. The witness was a fiction, Mr. Clement, but their reactions were real. Mr. Redding's spill, Mrs. Protheroe's rattle, Miss Lettice's clatter, Mr. Hawes's cough, they flinched, each in their way. The guilty are among them, I'm certain, and the web is tightening." Leonard, awed, shook his head. "You've stirred them, Miss Marple. But what now? Slack needs evidence, not reactions." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile faint. "Evidence follows, Mr. Clement, when the guilty move. Like my maid's cousin, who swore she hadn't taken the sugar, but hid it in her room. We must watch and wait." That evening, Miss Marple visited Inspector Slack, sharing her observations without revealing the ruse. "The van, Inspector," she said, "is key. Its driver knew the Vicarage's rhythm. And the screw. Have you considered eyeglasses? Mr. Redding, Mr. Hawes, even Mrs. Lestrange wear them. A search of their belongings might yield something." Slack, grudgingly impressed, agreed to search Lawrence's studio, suspecting the van's keys or paint matching the smudge. He dispatched a constable, his mind racing. The tea's effect, though he didn't know its cause, had unsettled his suspects, and he sensed a break was near. The village, meanwhile, churned with fresh gossip. Mrs. Price Ridley, at the post office, declared the tea a revelation, citing Anne's haste and Lawrence's nerves. Miss Weatherby whispered of Lettice's guilty look, while Miss Hartnell noted Hawes's flight as suspicious. Mrs. Lestrange, seen sketching by the church, drew renewed scrutiny, her solitude now ominous. Miss Marple, returning home, lit her lamp and resumed her knitting. The screw, the hair, the scuff mark, and the glove arrayed in her mind. The tea had worked, stirring the guilty, but the final proof lay in their next move. She pictured the vicarage at dusk, the van's hum, the window's latch, the phone's ring. The trap was sprung, and the truth, like her roses, was unfurling, needing only a steady hand to pluck it. At the vicarage, Leonard prayed for peace, the tea's tension a new burden. Griselda, tidying the china, hoped her role had helped, though doubt gnawed at her. Slack, in his office, planned his search, the pistol a silent challenge. And Miss Marple, her needles clicking, wove the final strands, knowing the killer's next slip would lay bare St. Mary Mead's darkest secret. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The 10th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder cast St. Mary Mead in a brittle, expectant light, the village poised on the edge of revelation. The vicarage, its once warm rooms now steeped in the chill of tragedy, stood as a silent epicentre, its study a shrine to the violence that had upended the parish. Miss Marple's subtle trap at the charity tea had stirred the guilty. Their reactions, Lawrence Redding's spilled tea, Anne Protheroe's rattled cup, Lettice's clattered spoon, and Mr. Hawes's panicked cough, lighting a fuse that now burned toward truth. Inspector Slack, his relentless pursuit fueled by the case's mounting clues, sensed a breakthrough, though the pistol, the paint smudge, the screw, the scuff mark, the hair, and the perfume remained a maddening puzzle. Leonard Clement, weary from the suspicion that shadowed him, clung to his duties, praying for a resolution that would restore his home's sanctity. Inspector Slack, his sharp eyes glinting with purpose, acted swiftly on Miss Marple's suggestion to search Lawrence Redding's studio. The tea's effect, though he didn't grasp its orchestration, had unsettled his suspects, and the possibility of finding the van's keys or matching paint drove him forward. That morning he led a constable to the converted barn where Lawrence worked, its cluttered interior a maze of canvases, brushes, and turpentine, The search was meticulous, every drawer and tin inspected, until the constable, prying open a paint-splattered box, uncovered a set of keys, their tag marked with a local garage's logo. Nearby, tucked in a rag, was a pair of eyeglasses. One lens missing a screw, its threading a perfect match for the clue Miss Marple had found by the vicarage gate. Slack's pulse quickened as he bagged the evidence, his mind racing. The keys, if linked to the van, could tie Lawrence to the scene, and the glasses sealed his connection to the screw. He confronted Lawrence, summoned from his temporary lodging in the station's stark interview room. The artist, his charm frayed, by detention, eyed the keys with a flicker of unease, but maintained his defiance. "Those aren't mine," Lawrence said, leaning back in his chair. "I don't own a van, and I haven't driven one. As for the glasses, yes, they're mine, but I lost them weeks ago. Someone's planting this, Inspector, to keep me in your sights." Slack's lips curled, his patience thin. "Lost them, did you? Like you lost your pistol, which turned up in a hedgerow after shooting Protheroe. You're slipping, Redding. The keys match a van rented from Much Benham, seen by the vicarage the night of the murder, and that screw, found where the van stood, fits. Your glasses. Care to explain?" Lawrence's jaw tightened, but his voice held steady. "I can't explain what I didn't do. I was painting, not driving vans or shooting colonels. Someone's using my things, my gun, my glasses, to frame me. You're barking up the wrong tree, Slack." Slack, unconvinced, ordered a deeper search of the garage records, hoping to trace the van's renter. He also sent the keys for forensic analysis, seeking prints or traces of the vicarage's soil. Yet doubt gnawed at him. The pistol's clean surface, the van's fleeting presence, and Anne's flawed confession suggested a plan too intricate for Lawrence's brash temperament. He needed a confession or a witness to close the case. Miss Jane Marple, meanwhile, continued her quiet work, her cottage a sanctuary, where she sifted the case's fragments with a weaver's care. The screw, the glove, the scuff mark, the hair, the grass smear, and the perfume formed a vivid pattern in her mind, its outlines sharpened by the tea's revelations. Lawrence's spill and Anne's rattle confirmed their entanglement, but Lettuce's clatter and Hawes's cough hinted at wider ripples. The van, she believed, was the linchpin, a prop meant to be seen, its driver a key player in the plot. As she knitted by her window, her thoughts turned to the confrontation she sensed was near, a moment when the guilty would falter under the weight of their own deceit. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where Griselda was tidying the drawing room, her energy a bulwark against the village's gloom. Leonard, drafting a sermon, looked up with weary gratitude as Miss Marple entered, her basket brimming with late dahlias. "Miss Marple," he said, rising, "your tea worked wonders, though it's left us all on edge." Slack's found keys in Lawrence's studio, and glasses matching the screw. "He's certain it's him, but I can't shake the feeling there's more." Griselda, stacking teacups, nodded eagerly. "More, indeed." Anne looked like a ghost when she left the tea, and Lawrence could barely hold his cup. Lettuce was odd too, dropped her spoon like it burned her. And poor Mr. Hawes, coughing, like he'd choke. "Miss Marple, you've stirred them up, but what now?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her needles emerging. "Now, Griselda, we wait for the guilty to move. The keys are a breakthrough, but not the end. If they link to the van, they confirm its role, but the driver remains a shadow. The glasses, too, are telling. Mr. Redding's yes, but lost, he claims, and I'm inclined to believe him in part. The screw was dropped in haste by someone who stood by the gate, watching. The scuff mark, the hair, the glove, they point to a woman, I think, working with a man. A pair, bound by need. Leonard frowned, his spectacles slipping. A pair? You mean Anne and Lawrence, as Slack suspects? Her confession, the glove, the perfume. It all fits her, doesn't it? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. It fits, Mr. Clement, but too neatly, like my knitting when I've cheated, a stitch. Mrs. Protheroe's confession was a shield meant to save Mr. Redding, but it hid her true role. I believe she made the phone call, ensuring your absence, and drove the van, marking the gate with her shoe and glove. Mr. Redding, I suspect, fired the shot, entering through the window, leaving the paint and the screw. They planned it together, driven by love and desperation, using the vicarage's openness to blur their tracks. The pistol, planted later, was meant to suggest an intruder, but their haste betrayed them. Griselda's eyes widened, her cup clattering. Together! Oh, Miss Marple, it's chilling. Anne, so poised, and Lawrence, so dashing, planning a murder. But why confess so badly? And what about Lettice? She reacted at the tea, too. Miss Marple's lips curved, a faint smile. Lettice is a question, Griselda. Her reaction suggests knowledge, perhaps not of the act, but of its cause. She hated her father, and her sketches show a sharp mind beneath her vagueness. She may have suspected, or overheard, their plan. As for Anne's confession, it was a sacrifice, meant to free Lawrence when he was arrested, but her heart faltered on the details. In my experience, love makes liars bold, but careless. Like my friend's niece, who swore she hadn't met her suitor, but left his letters in her drawer. Leonard rubbed his temples, the theory overwhelming. It's plausible, Miss Marple, but Slack needs proof. The keys, the glasses, will they be enough? And what of Mrs. Lestrange or Hawes? Their reactions at the tea weren't innocent. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes thoughtful. Mrs. Lestrange is an enigma, Mr. Clement, but her solitude may be her shield, not her crime. Mr. Hawes's nerves suggest fear, perhaps of his own secrets. Protheroe's accusation of theft lingers. But the web centres on Anne and Lawrence. The keys, if they fit the van, will tighten the noose, and their reactions at the tea betray their guilt. We need only the final thread. The thread came sooner than expected. That evening, Slack's constable returned from the garage, confirming the keys belonged to a van rented under a false name, its description matching Mary's account. Forensic analysis found traces of Vicarage, soil on the keys, and a smudge of oil paint identical to the study's stain on the tag. Slack, electrified, summoned Lawrence and Anne to the station, determined to break them. Miss Marple, invited by a grudging Slack to observe, sat quietly in the corner, her knitting a soft rhythm against the room's tension. Slack faced Lawrence first, the keys and glasses on the table. These were in your studio, Redding, said, his voice a blade. The keys fit the van by the vicarage, with soil from the gate. The glasses matched the screw we found there. You drove, you shot, you hid the pistol. Confess and save us the trouble. Lawrence, pale but defiant, shook his head. I didn't drive. I didn't shoot. Someone's using my things, my gun, my glasses, now these keys. I'm being framed, and you're too blind to see it." Slack's eyes narrowed. But before he could press, Anne, waiting outside, burst in. Her composure shattered. "Stop it!" she cried, her voice raw. "Leave him alone. It wasn't Lawrence. It was me. I told you. I shot Lucius. Let him go." Slack, startled, recovered quickly. "You, Mrs. Protheroe, your story's full of holes, and you know it. The desk, the pistol, you got it all wrong. You're covering for him, but it won't work. These keys, this screw, they point to Reading, and you're in it together." Anne's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, tears streaming. "No, no, you don't understand. We couldn't go on. Lucius was a monster. He controlled everything. Our lives, our love. We planned it, yes, but I didn't shoot him. I called, I drove, I watched. Lawrence, he did it for us, for freedom. But it's my fault, too. Arrest me, not him." Lawrence, his face ashen, lunged forward. "Anne, stop. Don't say another word. I did it, Slack. I shot Protheroe. Then only helped with the call and the van. She didn't know I'd go through with it until it was done. Let her go. She suffered enough." The room froze, the confessions hanging like smoke. Miss Marple, her needle still, watched with quiet sorrow. Her theory confirmed. Slack, stunned but triumphant, signalled his constable to take notes. "So, you both planned it," he said, his voice cold. "Reading, you fired. Mrs. Protheroe, you called and drove. The van, the pistol, the paint. It was you two, using the vicarage to throw us off. Why there? Why not at Old Hall?" Lawrence, his defiance crumbling, sighed. "The vicarage was easy, open, busy. No one questions a visitor. We knew Clement would be out, thanks to Anne's call. I went in through the window, shot him, and left. The pistol was supposed to look like a stranger's, but we panicked, hid it badly. We thought the village's gossip would cover us, blame some outsider, or Hawes, or even Lettuce." Anne, sobbing, nodded. "I called from the Blue Boar, used the van to be seen, then drove it back. I wore gloves, but one got stained. I didn't think it would come to this." Slack, his case secured, turned to Miss Marple, his tone grudging. "You were right, Miss Marple. The keys, the screw, they led us here. How'd you know?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, tinged with sadness. "I only watched, Inspector. People tell their stories, if you listen. The screw, the glove, the hair, they were like my roses, each a sign of the hand that tended them. Love, unchecked, can be cruel, and these two loved too fiercely to see the cost." Lawrence and Anne were led away, their confessions recorded, their trial a certainty. The village, learning of the arrests, erupted in shock. Mrs. Price Ridley proclaiming it a scandal foretold, and Miss Weatherby mourning love's ruin. Lettuce, when told, wept silently, her sketches abandoned, her suspicions confirmed. Mrs. Lestrange, unmoved, continued her solitary walks, while Mr. Hawes, relieved, returned to his duties, his nerves eased. Miss Marple, back at her cottage, resumed her knitting, her lamp casting a warm glow. The screw, the hair, the glove, the scuff mark. They had done their work, revealing a plot born of desperation. She felt no triumph, only a quiet grief for the lives undone. The confrontation, like her garden's pruning, had cut away the deadwood, but the scars remained, a reminder of St. Mary Mead's fragile peace. At the vicarage, Leonard closed his Bible, the confessions a balm to his wounded home. Griselda, planning a new fate, hoped to heal the village, though her heart ached for Anne. Slack, in his office, filed his report, the pistol a silent trophy. And Miss Marple, her needles clicking, let the case fade into memory, knowing the truth, like her roses, bloomed briefly, but left its mark on the village's quiet lanes. Chapter 12. Peace Restored. The 11th day since Colonel Protheroe's murder dawned with a tentative softness, as if St. Mary Mead exhaled a long-held breath. The village, battered by the storm of suspicion and revelation, began to mend its frayed edges, its lanes reclaiming their quiet rhythm. The vicarage, its rooms no longer echoing with the tread of Inspector Slack's men, stood once more as a haven, though the shadow of the study's tragedy lingered like a faint bruise. The confessions of Anne Protheroe and Lawrence Redding, wrenching in their raw honesty, had closed the case, their guilt laid bare by the web of clues Miss Jane Marple had so deftly woven. The pistol, the paint smudge, the screw, the scuff mark, the hair, the glove, and the perfume had each played their part, guiding the village from chaos to clarity. Yet, for Leonard Clement, the restoration of peace was bittersweet, a fragile gift tempered by the cost of human frailty. Inspector Slack, his ferret-like intensity softened by the case's resolution, departed St. Mary Mead with a grudging respect for its unassuming sleuth. His final report, filed with meticulous care, detailed the conspiracy. Anne's phone call to clear the vicarage, her role as the van's driver, and Lawrence's fatal shot through the study window, driven by a love warped by Protheroe's tyranny. The keys found in Lawrence's studio, the glasses matching the screw, and the paint linking the smudge to his supplies had sealed their fate. Slack, though triumphant, muttered about meddling old maids as he boarded the train to Much Benham, unaware that Miss Marple's quiet genius had outshone his dogged pursuit. Leonard, freed from the weight of suspicion, resumed his pastoral duties with a renewed sense of purpose, though the violation of his study left a scar on his heart. The crumpled note, once a symbol of his unwitting role, was now a reminder of how close he had come to being ensnared in the killer's plot. He spent the morning visiting parishioners, offering comfort to those shaken by the arrests, his gentle presence a balm to the village's wounds. At the vicarage, Griselda, ever resilient, threw herself into planning a village fete, determined to restore St. Mary Mead's spirit. "We need joy, Len," she declared, pinning bunting in the parlour. "After all this darkness, a bit of laughter will do us good." Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming grace, returned to her cottage, her basket of knitting and garden clippings a familiar companion. The case's resolution brought her no pride, only a quiet satisfaction that the truth had surfaced like a seedling breaking through soil. Her tin box, holding the screw, the hair, and the grass smear, was tucked away, its contents no longer needed. As she tended her roses, her sharp eyes scanned the village, noting the subtle shifts in its rhythm, the postmistress's brisk nod, the children's laughter by the green, the absence of whispers at the Blue Boar. St. Mary Mead was healing, but Miss Marple knew its peace was fragile, a delicate bloom that required constant care. That morning, the village gathered at the church for a special service. A quiet acknowledgment of the ordeal's end, Leonard, in his surplice, spoke of forgiveness and renewal, his voice steady despite the weight of memory. "We have been tested," he said, his eyes sweeping the pews, "but in our trial we find strength. Let us rebuild, not with judgment, but with compassion." The congregation, including Miss Weatherby, Miss Hartnell, and even Mrs. Price Ridley, listened in rare silence, their usual gossips subdued by the gravity of the moment. Lettice Protheroe, pale and withdrawn, sat alone, her stepmother's absence a void beside her. Mrs. Lestrange, ever aloof, slipped in late, her presence a quiet enigma. After the service, Miss Marple lingered in the churchyard, her basket at her feet. Dr. Haydock, joining her, offered a wry smile. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, lighting a pipe. "Slacks off crowing about his victory. But we know who unravelled this tangle. Those clues, the screw, the glove, the hair, you saw what we missed." Miss Marple's lips curved, her expression mild. "I saw nothing extraordinary, Doctor. People leave traces, like my roses leave petals. The screw was a man's haste, the glove a woman's carelessness, the hair a moment's oversight. Anne and Lawrence wove a clever web, but webs are fragile, and a village sees all if you watch." Haydock chuckled, puffing smoke. "You're wasted here, you know. Scotland Yard could use you. What's next? Another mystery, or back to your roses?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was soft. "My roses need me, Doctor. Mysteries come unbidden, like weeds, and I'll tend them if they do. But for now, St. Mary Mead wants quiet, and I'm content to give it." As they parted, Miss Marple walked to the vicarage, where Griselda was overseeing a delivery of fete supplies. The lawn, soon to host stalls and games, buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the grim days of investigation. Griselda, spotting Miss Marple, waved her over, her curls bouncing. "Miss Marple, you must see the plans. We're having a cake stall, a raffle, and even a band. Well, Mr. Archer's fiddle, but it's something. You'll come, won't you?" "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, settling on a garden chair. "A fete is just what we need. But tell me, how is Miss Lettice? She looked so alone in church." Griselda's face sobered, her voice low. "Poor thing. She's staying with her aunt in St. Mary Mead, but she's like a ghost. Annie wrote her a letter apologizing, saying she never meant for Lettice to suffer. Lawrence, too, sent a note, asking her to forgive him. I think she knew something, her sketches, those angry lines, but she's too young to carry it all." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "Youth bears much, Griselda, but it bends, not breaks. Miss Lettice will find her way, though. It pains her now. In my experience, the young, like my saplings, grow stronger in storms." Leonard, joining them, carried a tray of lemonade, his face lighter than it had been in days. "Miss Marple," he said, pouring, "I owe you more than—" "Thanks. Your tea, your trap. It was masterful. Without you, we might never have known the truth. But I wonder, how did you see it so clearly?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. "I only listened, Mr. Clement. People tell their tales, in glances, in silences, in the things they drop or hide. Anne's glove, Lawrence's screw, the village's whispers. They were like my knitting, each stitch a story. I've lived long enough to know the patterns, and St. Mary Mead is a book I've read many times." Griselda, sipping lemonade, grinned. "You're a detective, Miss Marple, whether you admit it or not. I told Len we should put up a plaque. Miss Marple, solver of mysteries. What do you say?" Miss Marple laughed, a rare, soft sound. "No plaques, Griselda. My roses are tribute enough, but I'll take a scone at your fate if you bake them." The conversation turned to lighter matters, the fates' promise lifting their spirits. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the case, its resolution a tapestry of human flaws. Anne and Lawrence, bound by love and desperation, had gambled on the village's chaos to hide their crime, using the vicarage's openness, the phone call's deception, and the van's fleeting presence. Their plan, bold but brittle, had crumbled under the weight of small mistakes. The paint smudge from Lawrence's studio, the screw from his glasses, the glove stained by Anne's haste, the hair left in the phone box. Each was a petal, fallen from their carefully tended plot, and Miss Marple had gathered them with a gardener's care. That afternoon, the village stirred with preparations, children stringing banners, and women baking for the fete. Mrs. Price, Ridley, chastened by the case's outcome, offered a fruitcake, her usual spite softened by humility. Miss Weatherby, ever eager, organised a flower stall, while Miss Hartnell, less vocal than before, donated ribbons. Even Mrs. Lestrange, still an enigma, sent a sketch for the raffle, her delicate lines hinting at a warmth beneath her reserve. Mr. Hawes, his nerves steadied, volunteered to judge the children's games, his quiet return a sign of healing. Miss Marple, walking through the village, paused at the Blue Boar, where the phone box stood, its glass now polished by the innkeeper's boy. The faint perfume was gone, but she recalled its floral note, a whisper of Anne's presence. She pictured her there, dialing in haste, her voice soft but urgent, setting the trap that cleared the vicarage. The hair, dark and curled, had been hers, a careless trace of her role. Miss Marple sighed, her heart heavy for the woman whose love had led to ruin, and for Lawrence, whose passion had fired the fatal shot. At the church, Leonard was arranging hymnals, his movements deliberate, as if reclaiming the space from its recent turmoil. Miss Marple joined him, her basket at her side. "Mr. Clement," she said, settling on a pew, "you've borne much these days. The vicarage is yours again, and the village looks to you for guidance. It's a heavy mantle, but you wear it well." Leonard smiled, his eyes tired but warm. "Thanks to you, Miss Marple. Your clarity cut through our fog. I keep thinking of Anne and Lawrence, how love could twist so darkly. It's a lesson, isn't it, in the frailty of the heart?" Miss Marple's needles resumed, their rhythm a quiet pulse. "Frailty, yes, Mr. Clement. Love is a fire, warming or burning as it will. Anne and Lawrence sought freedom, but their path was thorns. In my experience, the heart, like my roses, needs pruning to thrive. They chose a harsher cut." Leonard nodded, his thoughts turning to Lettice, whose pain he felt as his own. "Lettice suffers most, I think. She's lost both parents in a way. I'll visit her tomorrow, offer what comfort I can." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "A kind act, Mr. Clement. She's young, and youth mends, though it scars, like my niece's girl, who lost her father but found strength in time. Lettice will too, with care." As evening fell, the village glowed with anticipation. The fates promise a beacon of renewal. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her garden a riot of late blooms. She clipped a fading rose, its petals soft but brittle, and thought of Anne, whose beauty had hidden a desperate heart. The case, now closed, was a story etched in St. Mary Mead's lore, a cautionary tale of love's peril and the village's watchful eyes. That night, Griselda visited, her energy undimmed. "Miss Marple, you must come early to the fete," she insisted, perched on a chair. "We've got a fortune-teller, Mrs. Archer's sister, in a tent, and the band's practising, though it's mostly noise. You'll be our guest of honour, even if we don't say it aloud." Miss Marple laughed, her needles pausing. "No honours, Griselda. I'm just a villager like you. But I'll come, and I'll bring my roses for the stall. A fate is a fine thing, to knit us together again." Griselda grinned, then sobered. "Do you think we'll forget Miss Marple? The murder, I mean. It's changed us, hasn't it?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to her garden, dark beyond the window. "We don't forget, Griselda, but we soften. Like my roses after a storm. They droop, but they bloom again. St. Mary Mead will too, with time and care." Griselda left, her step lighter, and Miss Marple lit her lamp, her knitting a soft rhythm against the quiet. The screw, the hair, the glove, the scuff mark, they were relics now, their story told. She thought of Anne and Lawrence, awaiting trial, their lives a cautionary bloom, and of Lettice, whose youth would carry her forward. The village, with its gossip and grace, had survived its trial, its peace restored not by forgetting, but by facing its shadows. At the vicarage, Leonard closed his study door, the room cleansed by prayer and purpose. Griselda, sketching fate plans, hummed a tune, her heart lifted by hope. Slack, in much Benham, filed his last note, the case a feather in his cap. And Miss Marple, her needles clicking, tended her mental garden, knowing that St. Mary Mead's peace, like her roses, would endure, watched over by a spinster whose quiet eyes saw all.